Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Echoes of the Forgotten Foundation. The hum of machinery had become a second heartbeat for me over the past few months. I had taken the job at the old Woodford construction site with a sense of necessity rather than passion. The pay was good, and my rent was due. I was new to the city, a mere shadow among the industrious, and I couldn't afford to be picky. I arrived early each day, the chill of dawn still clinging to the air as I prepared for the labor ahead. The sun rose behind the skeletal frame of what was to be a towering residential building, its partially constructed skeleton protruding against the horizon like a grim tooth. From the moment I stepped onto the site, I felt the weight of its history. Workers before us had whispered tales of the ground beneath their feet. Rumors, I thought, just idle gossip to scare the newcomers. But the more I heard, the more I felt a lingering unease settle in the pit of my stomach. It started with the familiar sound of construction chaos, the grinding of metal, the clattering of wood, and the intermittent cries of foremen barking orders. Yet, there were times when silence swallowed the site whole, as if the very air had thickened, muffling the world outside. I had gravitated toward the framing team, where the work was both demanding and straightforward. There were 5 of us, each one bringing their own specialties to the table. We were a motley crew. There was Mark, the grizzled site veteran, who could measure a beam's length in his sleep. Carla, the relentless safety officer, who often threatened to shut the site down for minor infractions. And then there was Roger, young and eager, who had taken to construction like a duck to water. I liked them, but I felt more like an outsider, a temporary addition to their well-tuned machine. As I drove a nail into place one afternoon, a shiver crawled down my spine, inexplicable and sharp. I glanced at Mark, who stood a few feet away, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You all right?" he asked, noticing my distraction. I nodded, brushing it off. Nothing was wrong. Just a chill, as if the wind had whispered a warning. That night, I lay awake, the remnants of the day swirling in my mind. The site had taken on a different character as the sun set. Shadows stretched long and menacing, the beams of the unfinished building casting distorted shapes across the ground. I recalled the stories about a fatal accident decades ago, a collapse that had taken lives, their spirits rumored to linger, restlessly seeking closure. The following morning, I arrived early again, the site enveloped in a heavy fog that clung to everything like a shroud. The machinery seemed to creak more than usual, almost as if it were groaning under the weight of its own existence. I exchanged some pleasantries with Roger, but his eyes were darting, clouded with something that felt like more than just tiredness. "Did you hear it last night?" he asked, nervously tapping his fingers against the wood. I hadn't heard anything, but the concern in his voice ignited an ember of dread deep within me. As the days passed, I began to notice small things. Tools misplaced, heavy footsteps echoing when no one was around, and the flickering of lights that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I thought I was imagining it, attributing my fears to exhaustion. The whistle of the wind could easily be mistaken for whispers, and the shadows that danced along the beams were merely tricks of the light. Yet, an oppressive aura had settled over the site, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. One afternoon, as we took a break, Mark leaned against a stack of lumber, his face grave. "You know," he began, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "sometimes I think I hear them. The workers who died here. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them crying out." I chuckled nervously, dismissing his words. He was just trying to scare us, a way to bond over shared fears. But as the week wore on, the sounds grew more distinct, muffled voices carried on the wind, a strange clatter echoing in the empty spaces. The crew grew jumpier, glancing over their shoulders while working, their laughter subdued. My heart raced each time the silence enveloped us, and even Carla's unwavering vigilance faltered under the weight of the unseen. On Friday, as we worked to make sense of the increasing accidents and injured hand here, a drop load there, Roger stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading down into the bowels of the structure. "You guys have to see this," he called, his voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. Against my better judgment, curiosity gnawed at my insides, and I found myself following him into the dim, dust-laden passage. We descended into darkness, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. The flashlight beams danced across the walls, revealing ancient graffiti and crumbling masonry. It felt wrong, trespassing where we didn't belong. A hollow echo seemed to respond to our presence, a soft whisper that tickled at the back of my mind. A chill swept through me, and I turned to leave, but something held me in place, a fleeting glimpse of movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the reach of light. Heart hammering, I stepped back, finding the staircase suddenly unyielding beneath my feet. I turned to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The oppressive presence around us thickened, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. I wasn't ready to confront whatever dark entity had thrived in the wreckage of this site. We escaped back to the surface, gasping, the air outside feeling like a reprieve. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just the dark corners of my imagination. But deep down, I knew I had uncovered something far more sinister than I could fully comprehend. And now, the ground beneath us felt alive, restless, and hungry. The sun dipped below the horizon, its last rays bleeding into the sky, casting long shadows over the skeletal framework of the construction site. I stood there, still gripping the hard hat in my hand, unnerved by the eerie silence that enveloped the area. The sounds of machinery had become a distant memory, leaving only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of metal. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the site, the crunch of gravel beneath my work boots echoing in the stillness. My senses sharpened as I moved through the maze of girders and scaffolding. The foreman, Rick, had left me a list of tasks that had suddenly seemed insignificant against the backdrop of the sprawling, half-finished structure. I wasn't sure why, but I felt an uneasiness creeping in, a sense that I was being watched. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. After all, it was just construction work. We built things. It was supposed to be safe. As darkness shrouded the site, the yellow floodlights flickered to life, casting an uninviting glow that only heightened my unease. The shadows danced along the walls, creating the illusion of movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were alive, whispering secrets that I was not privy to. I forced myself to concentrate on the task at hand, focusing on the tools strewn about, hammers, screws, and the looming shape of the structure yet to be completed. Moments later, I stumbled upon a section of the site that I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind a wall of debris, hidden from view. A large excavation had been made, revealing a gaping pit that appeared to descend deep into the earth. The flashlight beam from my phone trembled as I peered into the void. A chill ran down my spine. The pit's walls were lined with jagged rocks, and something beneath the surface seemed to glisten with an unsettling allure. I knelt, peering closer, my curiosity overpowering my common sense. As I leaned over, the ground beneath me shifted slightly, and I scrambled back, heart racing. Shadows danced ominously within the pit, as if something was writhing just out of sight. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I instinctively glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something standing behind me. The ambient silence was thick, as if the world held its breath. I stood up, shaking off the surreal moment, and returned to my task. As I worked, the feeling of being watched returned, more intense this time. I glanced around, half expecting to see one of the other workers lurking in the shadows, but I was alone. In an effort to dispel my growing paranoia, I began to whistle softly, a tune I had long forgotten. The sound of my voice filled the silence, but it felt hollow, echoing back at me from the dark corners of the site. I returned to my tasks, trying to drown out the discomfort gnawing at my thoughts, but the shadows seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. With each passing minute, the atmosphere grew heavier. The pit was a constant distraction, drawing my gaze like a magnet. I couldn't resist the allure anymore. Leaving my tools behind, I approached the edge again. The flashlight beam flickered, revealing something glinting at the bottom. My heart raced again, curiosity mingling with fear. A part of me knew I shouldn't be down there. Something was wrong. I grabbed a length of rope we had left lying around, tying it carefully to a sturdy piece of metal nearby. With a deep breath, I secured my harness and began the descent, feeling the cold air rush past me, sending shivers through my body. The world above shrank away, leaving me encased in darkness. Deeper and deeper I went, the walls of the pit rising like sentinels, closing in around me. The beam of my flashlight bounced erratically as I descended, illuminating glimpses of something abnormal, strange shapes buried in the dirt, half-formed figures that sent chills racing down my spine. I froze, instinct screaming at me to turn back, but it was too late. I was committed. Finally, I reached the bottom, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The glinting object revealed itself, a twisted metal contraption, half submerged beneath debris. It was old, rusted, and strangely familiar, like the remnants of a machine long forgotten. I knelt to inspect it, my hands trembling as I brushed away the dirt. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the silence, a clang echoing from above. My heart raced as I jerked my head upward, disoriented. The rope swayed slightly, and I realized I was now alone. Panic clawed at my throat as I scanned the darkness above. I could hear muffled voices now, a cacophony of whispers that sent a chill coursing through my veins. Then it happened, a shadow darted past the edge of the pit, too quick to identify, but unmistakably there. It was low to the ground and moved with a grace that should not exist in a construction site. I stumbled back, my instinct screaming for me to escape. As I turned, I felt something brush against my leg, cold and unyielding. With a surge of adrenaline, I leaped back, scrambling toward the rope. My pulse thundered in my ears as I clutched the fraying fibers, hoisting myself up with desperation. The whispers grew louder, more pronounced, as if they were pleading or warning me of something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I pulled myself up, the ground finally solid beneath my feet as I emerged from the pit, gasping for breath. The site was still empty, yet the unease had morphed into something far more sinister. My heart thundered in my chest as I looked around, waiting for whatever had been watching me to reveal itself. The night had swallowed the site whole, and I was left standing in its depths, an unsettling realization dawning on me. I was now alone, and whatever was buried beneath the earth was just beginning to awaken. The sun sank behind the skeletal outline of the old mill, casting elongated shadows that danced unnervingly across the debris-strewn ground. I stood in the middle of the construction site, heart pounding as I recalled the strange occurrences from the previous days. It was more than just the unsettling feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. It was the whisperings that seemed to emanate from the walls, the way the workers eyed each other with palpable dread when they thought no one was watching. After Craig had stormed off, I took a moment to gather myself. I could hear the faint sound of metal grinding against metal. It was Justin, one of the newer guys, trying to align a piece of steel that had somehow twisted during transport. The thought of him wrestling with that heavy, unforgiving metal made me uneasy. I stepped closer, but the sinking feeling in my gut urged me to stay away. "Hey, need a hand?" I called, trying to sound casual. Justin glanced up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Nah, I got this." "Just a little stubborn, that's all," he replied, though his voice lacked confidence. I nodded and turned away, heading towards the far end of the site where the old storage shed stood. The building had long been abandoned, its wooden frame warped and splintered. An air of decay clung to it, and the smell of damp would mingle with something else, something rancid that made my skin crawl. I wanted to investigate, to see if something had been left behind that could shed light on the strange atmosphere hanging over the site, but I hesitated. The last time I had ventured near that shed, I had heard sounds that didn't belong, a soft weeping, like a child lost in the dark. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen displaying the time as nearly 6 o'clock. Darkness would soon drape over the site, and I did not relish the thought of wandering in the shadows. Yet, curiosity gnawed at me like a persistent rat. I took a deep breath and approached the shed, the wooden door hanging slightly ajar, creaking softly as if beckoning me inside. As I pushed the door open, it protested with a long, drawn-out groan. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through cracks in the wood. Dust motes floated in the slivers of illumination, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. I stepped inside, treading carefully over the rotting floorboards, their integrity in question with each cautious step. The walls were lined with old tools, rusted and forgotten. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might explain the site's strange reputation. But it was the corner that caught my attention. A tattered canvas tarpaulin lay crumpled, partially obscuring something beneath. I approached it, heart racing, and pulled the fabric back. What lay beneath was a collection of photographs, yellowed with age, depicting the mill in its prime. Workers were smiling, their faces animated in the sunshine. But in the background, nearly hidden in the shadows, I discerned figures standing apart from the rest, their eyes hollow, their smiles twisted into something grotesque. A chill ran down my spine as I flipped through the stack. Each photo revealed more of those menacing figures, always lurking, always watching. I felt a sudden urgency to leave, the air weighed heavy with a foreboding presence. As I turned to exit, I froze. A sound echoed through the shed, a soft scraping, followed by a thud. I turned slowly, my breath hitching in my throat. Shadows shifted, and I sensed movement near the back wall. "Hello?" I called, attempting to project calmness, though my voice cracked. Silence draped over me like a thick blanket. I took a step back, pulse quickening, heart hammering in my chest. I was about to retreat when a low growl reverberated through the room, an animalistic sound that set every nerve on edge. I turned to flee, but that was when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. They echoed ominously against the walls, a sinister rhythm that quickened with my heartbeat. I darted for the door, feeling the oppressive darkness was alive, wrapping around me like a vice. Just as I reached the threshold, I felt a cold grip on my ankle, a force that yanked me back, sending me sprawling onto the floor. I screamed, desperation surging through me as I wrestled against the unseen entity, feeling it tugging, pulling me toward the encroaching shadows. The growl morphed into a laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that reverberated through the shed, chilling me to the bone. Using every ounce of strength, I kicked out, my foot connecting with something solid. The grip released abruptly, and I scrambled to my feet, lunging for the door. I could feel the darkness behind me, the weight of unseen eyes watching my every move as adrenaline propelled me forward. Bursting out into the waning light of dusk, I gasped for breath, the cool air stinging my lungs. I didn't stop to look back, running toward the safety of the workers gathered near their vehicles, their chatter barely registering in my mind. I needed to escape, to put distance between me and whatever horror lingered in that shed. "Hey! What happened?" Justin called, his brow furrowed as I drew near. I shook my head, breathless and wide-eyed. "Something's not right, in there. We need to get out of here." The day had taken a darker turn, and I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of the site office, casting long shadows over the stacks of blueprints strewn across the desk. I sat there, fingering a pencil, lost in thought. It had been 2 weeks since we broke ground on the old church property, and I couldn't shake off the sense that something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere around the site felt thick and stagnant, as if the very air was saturated with lingering dread. The crew had been on edge since the first day of excavation. Whispers traveled through the workers like a ghostly wind, each tale more outlandish than the last. I dismissed them at first, chalking it up to the tension of the project and the constant presence of the foreboding church that loomed over us. But as the days passed, those tales morphed into something darker, more sinister. On that particular morning, I gathered the team for a quick briefing. They filed in, eyes darting around as if the shadows had teeth. Barry, my lead foreman, lingered at the door, his expression grave. He cleared his throat, and I sensed it was not just the construction plans that weighed on his mind. "Listen, everyone," I started, but my voice was swallowed by the disquiet. "We need to focus on getting the foundation poured today. I know it's been rough, but we're making progress." "Progress?" Barry scoffed, crossing his arms. "You mean the kind that ends with us 6 feet under?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Hadn't I felt it too? The unease, the feeling that we were disturbing something best left buried. But this was construction. Nothing was truly sacred. We had a job to do, and my responsibility was to keep the team motivated. "We're professionals," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's keep our heads in the game." The crew dispersed, but the tension lingered like a dark cloud. As I walked to the excavation site, I noticed the ground had shifted overnight. The earth looked unsettled, as though it had exhaled something it had long held in. I crouched down, running my fingers over the uneven surface. There it was again, that feeling of being watched, an electric prickle climbing up my spine. Dismissing it as paranoia, I straightened and signaled for the backhoe operator to start digging. The machinery roared to life, drowning out the silence, but as the bucket clawed into the earth, a chilling wail echoed from deep within the ground. It cut through the cacophony like a hot knife, sending everyone into a stunned silence. The operator froze, wide-eyed, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted, but no one had an answer. "We need to keep going," I urged, forcing myself to sound more confident than I felt. "Just a weird sound from the machinery. Let's." Before I could finish, the ground shuddered violently. The whole site trembled like an old man trying to stand. I stumbled, barely finding my footing, and glanced around at the faces of my crew. Fear had replaced their earlier bravado, and I saw the panic in their eyes. "Everyone out!" Barry shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Move!" We scrambled away from the pit, and I felt the earth heaving beneath us, as if something ancient was awakening from its slumber. The sound of rushing air echoed from below, followed by a series of sharp cracks, like bones breaking. I stepped away from the excavation site, panting as I tried to gather my thoughts. It was just a construction site, a piece of land we were repurposing. But how could I ignore the sensation that this land didn't want us here? Once we were a safe distance away, I pulled out my phone, intending to call in a safety inspection. Before I could dial, Barry approached, his face pale. "There's something down there," he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. "I've heard stories, you know, about the church and what happened there." "What are you talking about?" I snapped, frustration rising with every word. "This is just a job. We can't let these stories get to us." But deep inside, I felt the truth of his words. The church had been a place of unrest. Years of whispers about the tragedies that had befallen the congregation, accidents, disappearances, swirled through my mind. The idea that we were digging into a graveyard of secrets made my stomach churn. "Let's take a break," Barry said, his voice trembling. "We can't work like this." I begrudgingly agreed, even though I felt the pressure of deadlines looming over me. As my team retreated to the trailer, I lingered, staring at the pit where the earth had begun to settle again. The air was thick, a palpable tension vibrating against my skin. That evening, I struggled to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a damp blanket. I returned to the site alone, drawn back by a force I couldn't identify. The shadows of the trees wrapped around the old church, and the sky deepened into a bruised purple. As I stood at the edge of the excavation, I heard the faintest sound, a whisper, barely audible. It beckoned from the dark, promising secrets and truths buried beneath layers of earth. I shouldn't have approached the edge, but my feet moved against my will, drawn in by an insatiable curiosity. The ground felt alive beneath me. With each step closer to the pit, I could hear it more distinctly, a voice entwined with the wind, pleading for release. I leaned over, and for a moment, the world fell silent, the stars blinking out one by one as I peered into the abyss. Each grain of soil seemed to pulse, rhythmic and steady, a heartbeat echoing in the darkness. Something moved in the shadows, and I stumbled back, heart racing. The wind picked up, carrying with it a rancid stench of decay and despair. I turned to run, the weight of the earth pressing down on my shoulders, a heavy reminder that I was trespassing on a graveyard of horrors. As I reached the trailer, I slammed the door shut, breathing heavily. I had to warn the crew. We were in over our heads, and whatever lay beneath the surface was waking up, hungry for the warmth of life. The construction was not just a job anymore. It felt like a desperate fight for survival against the darkness that threatened to engulf us. The daylight seeped into the construction site, filtering through the skeletal frames of what would soon be a high-rise, casting eerie shadows that danced against the scaffolding. I had spent weeks on this project, the sound of hammers and drills echoing in my ears even in my sleep. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and rusted metal, a pungent reminder of the labor that engulfed my days. But something else had settled in, an unsettling atmosphere that clung to me like the dust that coated the beams. It started with the old, weathered tool shed in the back corner of the site. Most guys dismissed it, saying it was just a relic from past days when the site had been alive with activity. But to me, it loomed like a sentinel of something dark. I had always felt a chill whenever I passed, as if the air thickened around it, a fear I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it had something to do with the faded warnings painted on its side, "Danger, do not enter." That phrase echoed in my mind as I stood beneath the skeleton of the towering structure, the day's work ahead of me. As the day wore on, I found myself drawn to the shed. My coworkers, lost in their own rhythm of grinding machinery and shouted conversations, didn't notice. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows, and I felt that familiar pull again. I didn't want to be left alone in the middle of the site. Isolation made my heart race. Yet, curiosity gnawed at me. What lay inside that shed? I approached cautiously, the crunch of gravel under my boots breaking the stillness. My heart beat faster as I reached for the rusted handle. My palms felt clammy as I twisted it, the door creaking open like a long dormant beast stirring from slumber. Inside, the space was cramped and dim, filled with a jumbled assortment of forgotten tools, broken boards, and dust that hung in the air like a shroud. A chill raced up my spine. I stepped inside, scanning the shadows for anything out of the ordinary. The air was stale, smelling of metal and mildew. I could hear the distant sounds of steel clashing, but they faded into a muffled buzz as I moved deeper into the shed. My eyes were drawn to a corner where an old workbench stood. On top, a rusted toolbox lay half open, its contents scattered like the bones of a forgotten creature. I knelt down, reaching out for a wrench that caught the dying light. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I glanced up, catching a glimpse of something darting behind a stack of old plywood. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare call out, my voice felt trapped. Instead, I slowly rose, the wrench still in my hand, and took a cautious step toward the shadow. The hairs on my neck prickled, and I felt a suffocating presence, as if the very walls of the shed were closing in. "What are you doing in here?" a voice barked from the entrance. I spun around to find Mike, the foreman, leaning against the doorframe. His face was a mask of confusion and irritation. "You know this place is off limits." I stuttered, the wrench slipping from my fingers and clattering to the floor. I glanced back at the corner where I had seen the flicker, but whatever it was had vanished. I thought I heard something. He stepped inside, the light from outside spilling in and illuminating the dusty interior. "You're wasting your time. This old shed is just a heap of junk. If you're not careful, you'll get hurt." I nodded, feeling foolish. "Yeah, I know." I just thought, "Let's go. We've got a lot of work to do, and I can't have you getting distracted." Reluctantly, I followed him out. As I stepped into the brighter light, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the unease lingered. The rest of the day passed slowly. Every creak and groan of the building felt amplified, as if the structure itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My mind replayed the moment in the shed, the flicker of movement that hadn't been explained. That night, I returned home, but sleep came in fits. I tossed and turned, haunted by shadows and the unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I arrived early, drawn back to the site. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting a pale light over the construction zone. I told myself I just needed to wrap my head around the work ahead, but a deeper urge propelled me. I headed straight for the shed. As I opened the door again, the chill returned, more pronounced than before. I scanned the interior, but everything lay undisturbed. My heart raced as I stepped inside, battling the instinct to flee. I had to know. I approached the workbench again, but this time I felt as though I was being watched. The oppressive silence weighed heavy on me, the air thick with unsaid warnings. Then it hit me. A smell. A putrid odor that curled my stomach. I looked around, feeling the walls closing in as I searched for the source. Beneath the workbench, something glistened in the shadow. I crouched down, and then the unmistakable wave of horror washed over me. What I found was not a tool but a bone, pale and slick with something dark. I recoiled, my breath hitching in my throat as the reality sank in. This was no ordinary construction site. The walls of this shed had held dark secrets, and my curiosity had unearthed something that should have remained buried. As I stumbled back, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness, my pulse racing like a caged animal. The last thing I heard as I thrashed against the door was the sound of laughter, echoing in the stillness around me. Something was waiting, and it was hungry. Story 2, Echoes of the Lost Grove. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape as I stood at the edge of Elderwood Forest. The air hung thick with an unsettling stillness, almost as if the very trees were holding their breath. I had heard the stories, whispers of restless spirits, mournful cries carried by the wind, and the sensation of unseen eyes watching from the depths of the woods. But I was practical. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, at least not until that evening. Growing up in the small town of Eldridge, nestled just outside the forest, I often dismissed the tales as the embellishments of bored teenagers and anxious parents. My friends and I had spent countless summer days wandering the edges of the forest, daring each other to venture deeper, only to retreat at the first hint of twilight. Yet, as I stood there alone that evening, the forest felt different. The light fading, I could almost taste the tension in the air. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my skepticism. Maybe it was the chill creeping in, or perhaps the fact that I was alone made it easier to feel the weight of those stories. I shook my head and stepped forward, my sneakers crunching on the brittle leaves scattered across the ground. A path wound ahead, barely visible in the dim light, an invitation to explore the unknown. As I ventured deeper, the trees closed in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. A cold breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I thought I heard a whisper carried on the wind. I paused, the hairs on the back of my neck bristling, but I rationalized it as my imagination playing tricks on me. I pressed on, curiosity outweighing my apprehension. I had no intention of going very far, just a quick walk to clear my head before heading home. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The path grew narrower, twisting like a snake, and the air became thick with an earthy smell that clung to my lungs. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, and I could almost convince myself that I saw shapes flitting between the trees. Then I stumbled upon a clearing, the moonlight spilling into the space like silver water. It felt oddly serene, yet an unshakable feeling of dread washed over me. I had always been drawn to nature, but something about this place felt wrong, as if it was hiding secrets just beneath the surface. I stepped into the clearing, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it, a stone well, crumbling and covered in moss. I approached cautiously, curiosity gnawing at me. The well was ancient, its stones slick with moisture. The air around it felt heavy, almost suffocating. I peered into the darkness below, but I couldn't see the bottom. It was as if the well was a portal to another world, one that begged to be explored but warned against at the same time. As I stood there, the wind picked up, and the trees began to sway, their branches creaking like old bones. It was then that I heard it, a low, mournful sound that rose from the depths of the forest. It was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was both a cry and a whisper, a call to the lost and the forgotten. My stomach twisted in knots, and I felt the urge to turn back. But a part of me was rooted to the spot, captivated by the haunting melody that seemed to seep from the very ground. I stepped back from the well, heart pounding, and turned to find the path I had come from. But as I did, the trees around me seemed to shift, the familiar trail swallowed by the shadows. Panic surged in my chest. I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but each turn felt wrong, each shadow more ominous than the last. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my ears, a cacophony of voices mingling with the rustle of the leaves. The once familiar sounds of the forest had morphed into something sinister. My breath quickened as I broke into a desperate run, branches snagging at my clothes as I blindly darted through the underbrush. The laughter of my childhood friends echoed in my mind, teasing me as I once teased them. I had always been the brave one, the explorer, the one unafraid of the dark. But this was different. This forest was alive with something that wanted to ensnare me. I stumbled, falling to my knees as the whispers reached a fever pitch, clawing at my sanity. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sounds to stop, but they only grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I felt as if I was being drawn towards something waiting, hungry and patient. I opened my eyes, the darkness around me thickening like a fog. And then, in the distance, I saw a light flickering, like a candle in the abyss. Hope surged within me. I pushed myself to my feet and ran towards it, ignoring the pounding in my chest and the fear gnawing at my mind. As I approached, the light faded, a cruel illusion that disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. I stopped, gasping for breath, and turned to find the path once more, but there was nothing but trees, all identical, all closing in around me like a cage. A cold sweat trickled down my back as I realized I was now alone. I could feel it, a presence lurking just beyond my sight, watching, waiting. The whispers turned into soft laughter, taunting me, an ancient chorus celebrating my despair. Panic gripped me tightly as I sprinted back toward the well, desperate for something familiar. The clearing loomed ahead, but as I reached it, I hesitated. The well stood ominously, its depths promising secrets I had no intention of uncovering. I could feel the eyes on me, the weight of their collective gaze pressing down with an unbearable intensity. And just like that, I understood. I had stumbled into Elderwood's embrace, a maw of darkness where legends breathed to life, where the forest had claimed far too many before me. I was not its first, and I wouldn't be its last. The morning light filtered through the dense foliage, casting an emerald glow on the forest floor. I stepped cautiously through the underbrush, acutely aware of how the shadows seemed to flicker and dance just beyond my vision. The stories about Maplewood Forest had seeped into my mind like a slow poison, the kind that made your heart race and your skin prickle with dread. I had visited this place countless times as a child, chasing after fading echoes of laughter and the soft rustle of leaves. But now it felt different, as if the trees themselves were whispering warnings in a language I could barely comprehend. I had ventured into the heart of the forest that day, drawn by a sense of unease mingled with morbid curiosity. After my encounter with the old woman, her unnerving presence lingered in my mind, a ghostly thread weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I recalled her eyes, dark and hollow, as she warned me to stay away. But the urge to uncover the truth was overwhelming, like a moth to a flame. I couldn't resist. The deeper I went, the quieter the world around me became. The usual sounds of birds chirping and insects buzzing fell mute, leaving only the echo of my footsteps against the damp earth. Each crunch of twigs felt like an unwanted disturbance, a shout in a sanctuary that preferred silence. I pressed on, heart pounding, breath hitching as I recalled the stories I had heard as a child. Tales of lost souls and twisted fates. Of the forest itself being an entity, housing spirits waiting for their next victim. As I walked, I stumbled upon a familiar clearing, the one I used to play in with my friends until the stories turned our laughter to silence. The gnarled tree in the center stood as a monument to our childhood innocence, its roots sprawling like skeletal fingers across the ground. I edged closer, conflict blooming in my chest. I should have turned back, driven by instinct, but curiosity clawed at me, urging me to test the boundaries of the known and the unknown. Kneeling beside the tree, I brushed my fingers over the rough bark, tracing the scars it had borne over the years. My thoughts spiraled back to the old woman's warning, do not anger the forest. I shook the memory from my mind, brushing away the unease that lingered like cobwebs. Just as I composed myself, I felt a chill roll over me, a creeping sensation that crawled up my spine. Was it the wind, or something more sinister? A rustling sound broke the silence, drawing my attention back to the edge of the clearing. I turned, my heart racing, but what I saw sent my breath rushing from my lungs. A figure stood at the tree line, half hidden by the shadows. It was impossible to distinguish any features, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, a heavy weight that made my skin prickle. Panic flared within me, urging me to flee, but my feet remained rooted in place, as if the earth itself had claimed me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I intended. The figure shifted, and with it, I thought I saw a glint of pale skin, a flash of something that didn't belong to this world. I clenched my fists, readying myself to run, when it stepped forward, revealing a young girl, no older than 10, her hair tangled and wild, eyes wide with despair. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Please." I took a step back, torn between instinctual fear and the need to understand. What happened? Are you lost? Her gaze darted to the trees behind her, a flicker of something that resembled pure terror crossing her face. "They're coming." Before I could ask who she meant, the air thickened, and a low rumble echoed from within the forest depths. The girl's eyes widened further, and in that moment, I felt a visceral dread seep into my bones. I thought of the old woman's warning again, the way her voice had trembled, as if the forest itself listened and waited. "Run," the girl cried, her voice cracking. But before I could react, the ground shook beneath me, the trees swaying as though caught in a tempest. A cacophony of whispers filled the air, a chorus of voices rising like a dreadful chant, drowning out my thoughts. Fear propelled me into action. I turned, sprinting down the path I had come, desperate to escape the ominous chorus. Behind me, I could hear the rustle of leaves, the flickering shadows of the trees stretching toward me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but the girl was gone, swallowed by the shadows as if she had never existed. The forest closed in around me, the branches reaching out like grasping hands. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled over roots and rocks, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel the forest itself pressing against me, urging me to stop, to listen, but I pushed through the growing despair. The stories began to replay in my mind, the tales of those who entered and never returned, the souls trapped forever within the forest's embrace. With every step I took, I fought against the weight of the forest's grasp, the voices rising in a ghastly chorus behind me. I could no longer differentiate the truth from the myth, the real from the imagined. Maplewood Forest was alive, and it was hungry. As I burst through the tree line, the sunlight blinded me for a moment. I stumbled into the open, collapsing against the familiar safety of the ground. The weight of the forest lifted, but the memory of the girl lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. Though I had escaped, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, a dark presence that would not let me go. The stories were real, and I had only just begun to peel back the layers of Maplewood's dark history. The forest had whispered its secrets, and I was now part of its chilling tale. The sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows that twisted and danced among the towering trees of Blackwood Forest. I stood at the edge, the familiar sense of dread creeping back into my chest. It was one thing to hear the stories around town, whispered in the hushed tones of fear, but it was another to feel the weight of that fear pressing down on me like the humid air of late summer. I could still hear Tom's laughter ringing in my ears from earlier in the day. He had scoffed at the legends, made light of the old tales his grandfather told him, and even dared me to spend a night in the forest. "What's the worst that could happen?" he had laughed, his voice echoing the bravado of youth. But as darkness threatened to envelop the forest, I found myself wishing I had dismissed his challenge, or at the very least, enlisted someone to join me. With each step I took into the oppressive gloom, the chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. An anxious knot coiled in my stomach, and I pressed on, the crunch of twigs beneath my feet sounding like gunfire in the stillness. Deep down, I regretted my decision to venture here alone, but the thrill of curiosity propelled me forward. I wanted to find out if the stories were real. It was said that the forest was cursed, a place where shadows held secrets far older than time. Locals spoke of sightings, figures flitting between trees, whispers carried on the wind, the feeling of being watched. The tales I had dismissed as mere folklore now pricked at my mind, whispering doubts that clawed at the edges of my resolve. As the last rays of sunlight slipped away, I illuminated the path ahead with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the gnarled roots and twisted trunks that loomed like specters. I paused for a moment, allowing the forest to swallow me whole. The air was thick, and a chill crept along my spine despite the warm evening. It wasn't long before I found the old stone marker, a remnant of another time, worn and moss-covered. It was said to mark the boundary of the cursed ground. I traced the letters with my fingers, feeling the rough texture beneath the dirt. My heart raced. This was where the stories came alive, where the veil between this world and the next thinned. I dared to take a few steps past the marker, almost expecting the ground to shift beneath me. The air seemed to hum with energy, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure dart behind a nearby tree. My breath caught in my throat, and I squinted into the shadows, but nothing remained. Still, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I moved deeper into the woods, heart pounding with each step, my flashlight flickering as if in response to my fear. The trees closed in around me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. As the darkness thickened, I stumbled upon an old clearing, a small patch of earth that felt out of place amidst the encroaching gloom. In the center stood a moss-covered stone altar, the top stained with something dark. Was it blood? I shuddered at the thought, the stories of sacrifices in the forest echoing in my mind. I could almost hear the voices of those who had come before me, their fears and regrets mingling with the rustling leaves. A strange compulsion drew me closer, and I knelt by the altar, my breath shallow. My fingers brushed against the stone, cold and slick. Just then, as if summoned by my presence, an unnerving rustling broke the silence. I jumped to my feet, flashlight shaking in my grip. The beam danced erratically, illuminating the trees in stark flashes. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of life. But there was nothing, only the dark, oppressive stillness of the forest. I felt it then, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My instinct screamed at me to flee, yet something held me captive, a morbid curiosity that kept my feet rooted to the spot. I strained my ears, listening for any clue, any disruption in the silence that might hint at the presence of another. Then, a whisper floated through the air, soft and barely discernible. It curled around my thoughts, pulling me deeper into the forest, deeper into the unknown. A chill raced down my spine as I caught fragments of words pleading, calling out. I couldn't make sense of it, but it felt as though the forest itself was inviting me to listen. With great hesitation, I followed the sound, drawn toward its source. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum. The path twisted through the trees, and the whispering intensified, becoming an almost melodic chant that reverberated through the branches above. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree, eyes wide with panic. The voice now felt closer, wrapping around me, tugging at my sanity. I thought I saw movement in the shadows, a figure flitting just beyond my vision. I turned, breathless, desperate for escape, but the whispers swelled, a cacophony of lost souls imploring me to stay. In that moment, reality slipped away, and I was left with nothing but the echoes of the forest and the relentless pull of the unseen. I had come in search of the truth, but what I found was a shadowed labyrinth that threatened to consume me whole. The stories weren't mere tales, they were warnings, and I was now intertwined with the darkness that had claimed so many before me. The sun had barely risen when I stepped outside, the lingering chill of the night still clinging stubbornly to the air. The town still slept, wrapped in a thick blanket of fog that seemed to swell from the earth itself, swallowing the edges of the world in a muted gray. I needed to clear my head after the unsettling events of the previous night, but the forest loomed ahead, dark and inviting, like a whisper calling me closer. My fingers trembled as I brushed the remnants of sleep away, and I hesitated at the forest's edge, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to ensnare me. I had to confront the creeping dread that had settled in my gut, an uneasy sensation that had grown into an insistent itch. My friends had urged me to stay away, to forget the stories of the haunted woods, but fear had become a cruel taskmaster, driving me deeper into its embrace. As I stepped onto the worn path, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot echoed in the stillness, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that enveloped the forest. Memories of my childhood flooded back, tales shared by the fire, whispers of ghostly figures that danced between the trees, and shadows that moved with a mind of their own. I glanced back toward town, the roofs of the houses barely visible through the fog, and felt a pang of longing. This wasn't just a forest, it was a threshold to a world I barely understood. With each step, I felt the air grow heavier, thick with an unseen presence. I tried to focus on the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, but the forest seemed to close in on me, its branches clawing at my resolve. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage I hoped would carry me through the morning. The stories were just that, stories. Ghosts didn't exist, and yet, the trees whispered secrets I couldn't quite decipher. I ventured deeper, the path winding like a serpent through the underbrush. The sunlight, when it broke through, was a weak and feeble thing, barely illuminating the way. What I had imagined as a peaceful retreat morphed into something oppressive, a living entity that watched with an insatiable hunger. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of my fragile humanity. The deeper I went, the more the air shifted. The forest felt electric, alive with energy that hummed against my skin. I caught movements in my periphery, a flicker of motion, a whisper of sound. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the anxious prickling along my spine told a different story. Every rustle, every snap of a twig became a harbinger of something lurking just beyond my sight. Then I found it, the clearing. It opened before me like a wound in the fabric of the forest, the trees forming a circle that seemed to hold its breath. In the center, a crumbling stone altar lay half buried under leaves, covered in a thick layer of moss, as if nature was trying to reclaim it. Something about it felt wrong, its presence heavy with the weight of forgotten rituals and unspeakable offerings. I hesitated, an instinctual warning echoing in the back of my mind, but I had come too far to turn back now. I approached cautiously, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My curiosity pulled me closer, urging me to reach out and touch the stone, to feel its stories woven into the cool surface. As my fingers brushed against the moss, a chill shot through me. It was cold, far colder than the air around me, and in that moment, the forest seemed to exhale. A low murmur filled the air, a chorus of voices rising from the depths of the soil, ancient and sorrowful. Panic gripped my heart, and I stumbled back, breath hitching painfully in my throat. The whispers thickened, weaving through the trees around me, drowning out my own thoughts. They spoke of loss, of despair, of souls trapped in an endless loop of suffering. And as I stood frozen, I felt it, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. I turned, half expecting to find a trick of the light. But there it was, a figure cloaked in darkness, blending seamlessly with the forest. Its shape twisted and shifted like smoke, the air around it thickening as it inched closer. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. The whispers grew louder, an overwhelming cacophony that clawed at my sanity. I stumbled back, desperate to escape. The path that had once seemed so familiar now twisted into a labyrinth, branches reaching out with gnarled fingers, hindering my every step. The shadows danced around me, laughter echoing through the air, chilling and mocking. My heart raced as I sprinted blindly, the thick fog curling around my ankles like a serpent. As I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, the familiar sight of my town came into view. I nearly cried out in relief, but the shadows lingered at the edge of the forest, watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I reached my front porch, collapsing against the door. The forest loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the morning sky, and I felt the weight of its secrets deep in my bones. The stories were true. I had ventured into a realm where the past clung to the present, and something had followed me back. The question gnawed at me as I caught my breath. Could the stories ever truly be put to rest? Or had I unwittingly awakened something that would forever haunt my nights? I didn't know, but the forest's whispers echoed in my mind, and I knew I would never feel safe again. The sun dipped below the horizon, shrouding the forest in a cloak of shadow, the trees whispering secrets in the chilly evening air. I had promised myself I wouldn't return to Cedar Hollow after the last incident, but there I was, standing at the edge of the tree line, feeling the weight of the forest pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. It had been weeks since I'd fled the cursed place, yet the nightmares hadn't abated. They replayed, vivid and jarring, with the same distorted faces calling my name, begging for something I couldn't comprehend. I clutched my flashlight tighter, its beam flickering nervously in the dimming light. I didn't know why I had come back. Perhaps it was to confront my fears or to seek closure for the friends I had lost. James and Lily had been gone for too long, swallowed by the woods like breadcrumbs in a ravenous mouth. I could still hear their laughter, their voices echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind, mixing with the distant murmurs of the trees. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of tangled branches and thick underbrush, each step toward it feeling like a slow march to my own execution. As I stepped into the shadows, the air turned still, the usual rustle of leaves and chirping of insects conspicuously absent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck prickling as I moved deeper. Each flick of my flashlight revealed gnarled roots that coiled like snakes and shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the light. I had marked my way using the string I'd wound around branches, a desperate attempt to avoid losing myself again. But as I ventured further, I realized the string hung limply, almost mocking me, as if the forest itself had conspired to strip me of my meager safety net. I paused, glancing back at the path I'd come from. It was swallowed by darkness. I felt the panic rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to breathe. "Just find them," I whispered to myself, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. "You need to bring them home." As I moved deeper, the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark scarred and contorted. My flashlight flickered again, and I took a deep breath, willing it to work. I had read the stories. I knew what lay in these woods. They thrived on fear, on the essence of those who dared to intrude. Legends spoke of spirits trapped in a limbo between worlds, their cries echoing in the dark, drawing the unwary closer. I shivered at the thought and pressed on. I stumbled across the old clearing, a place that had felt welcoming once, now imbued with a sense of dread. The remnants of a fire pit lay at its center, surrounded by the blackened stones that spoke of warmth and camaraderie. It felt wrong, like a relic from a time best forgotten. I remembered the night we had laughed and shared stories, oblivious to the darkness that slumbered in the forest's depths. A rustle broke the silence, and I swung my flashlight wildly, searching for the source. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the whispers that seemed to swell around me. It came again, a low murmur that sounded disturbingly human, sending tremors of icy fear coursing through me. I hesitated, straining to hear, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks, but the urge to turn back became an overwhelming weight pressing against my chest. "James? Lily?" I called, my voice trembling. It echoed back, distorted, a macabre mimicry that sent a shiver down my spine. The forest answered with silence, thick and suffocating. I edged toward the shadows, the light of my flashlight barely piercing the veil of darkness. The murmur grew louder, twisting, warping into something almost melodic, yet filled with sorrow and longing. It made my stomach churn. It was a call, a beckoning that pulled me toward the edge of the clearing. "Help us." The voice was a soft whisper, unmistakably human, layered with desperation. I took a step back, nearly stumbling over a root that reached out, like a hand trying to drag me under. "Stop!" I shouted into the void, my voice firm despite the quiver of dread. "Stop! I'm not here to play games." For a moment, there was only silence, the weight of the forest pressing down on me like a physical force. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like smoke. My breath caught in my throat as I trained my flashlight on it. Lily stood before me, her eyes wide and terrified, her clothes tattered and muddied. "Help us," she said again, her voice trembling as if the very words were clawing their way out. "Please, you have to help us." The forest twisted around her, shadows coiling like serpents. I felt a surge of hope and terror. "Lily, where's James?" My voice cracked, panic clawing at me. "He's trapped," she whispered, her gaze shifting, eyes darting back toward the thick underbrush. "We didn't mean to disturb it. It won't let us go." With that, the shadows seemed to crackle, the trees groaning as if they were alive, starved and angry. I took a step closer, my heart racing. I needed to reach her, to grasp her hand and pull her to safety. But the forest was alive. I could feel it tightening around me, an insatiable predator. "Lily!" I called again, fearing this might be some cruel illusion. But she remained, her expression pleading. "Please, before it's too late." "It feeds on our fear," she urged, her voice trembling as the shadows began to shift hungrily. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered one last time, plunging us into darkness. I could hear the whispering grow louder, closer, a cacophony of voices drowning out my thoughts. The forest was alive, hungry, and I was ensnared in its web. Come back. I screamed, desperate, but the shadows swallowed her whole, and a chilling laughter echoed around me. The trees shivered, the ground beneath my feet trembling as I turned to flee, heart racing, fear clawing at my every step. As I ran, I felt the forest reaching for me, the brush of its cold fingers against my skin. I stumbled, falling against the roots, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I was being chased by the darkness, the whispers growing louder, screaming for my despair. And as I broke free from the tree line, gasping for breath, I knew with every ounce of my being that I had unwittingly awakened something ancient, something that would not rest until it had claimed me as well. Story 3, Midnight Refuel, a stop to nowhere. The headlights of my worn-out sedan sliced through the thick veil of night as I approached the gas station. A flickering neon sign in the distance buzzed like an angry hornet, casting erratic shadows against the cracked pavement. It was the only source of light for miles. I had been driving for hours, my mind foggy and my eyes heavy. I needed fuel, and I needed it now. As I pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunched ominously beneath the weight of the car. The gas station was a relic, a remnant of a bygone era, with peeling paint and a rusty sign that read open 24 hours. The fluorescent lights flickered above, battling the darkness that seemed to swallow the place whole. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking behind me. A chill crept up my spine, but I shook it off. It was just my overactive imagination. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air wrapping around me like a damp shroud. The entrance to the gas station was devoid of customers, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of the highway. I approached the door, its bell jingling as I pushed it open. The smell of old coffee and stale snacks hit me like a wall. An older man stood behind the counter, his eyes flickering up from a tattered magazine. "Evening," he muttered, his voice gravelly and worn, as if he had spent his life shouting over the noise of the world. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. "I need to fill up." "Sure thing," he said, pointing toward the gas pumps outside. "You want to pay first or after?" "After," I told him, turning to head back outside. The air felt thicker out there, pressing against my skin. I walked to pump 3, my thoughts momentarily drifting as I fumbled to lift the nozzle. The sound of gasoline gurgling into my tank was oddly soothing, and I let out a small sigh of relief. At least there were no other cars around. The solitude was a balm on my weary soul. Just then, I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel behind me. I turned, heart racing, but there was only the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping unease that gnawed at me. Perhaps I was just jumpy from the long drive. As I finished pumping gas, the station's overhead lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows. I glanced toward the entrance, wondering if I should head back inside. Maybe I could grab a snack to hold me over until I reached the next town. But something held me in place, a primal instinct that told me to stay alert. The bell above the door chimed again, and a figure stepped into view. A woman, her appearance hazy in the half-light. She wore a long, tattered coat that dragged on the ground, and her hair hung in matted strands. She looked disheveled, her eyes wide and darting around as if she were being chased. "Help me," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, you have to help me before it gets here." I instinctively took a step back, a rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. "What's wrong?" She looked over her shoulder, panic etched deep in her features. "It's hunting me. You don't understand. It knows where I am." In that moment, the air thickened, and an unnatural silence enveloped us. The hum of the station seemed to fade, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible vibration that thrummed through the ground. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I glanced back toward the entrance, where the attendant's gaze had turned to us, stone cold and unflinching. "Get inside," I said, trying to project calmness I didn't feel. But the woman shook her head vigorously, stepping closer, her breath ragged. "No! It'll get you too. We can't let it know we're here." "Who? What do you mean?" My voice trembled, my instinct screaming at me to retreat. Before she could answer, the lights above us flickered again, plunging the lot into darkness for just a heartbeat. When they returned, the woman was gone. I spun around, searching the shadows, but all I found was the empty expanse of gravel and darkness. I bolted back toward the entrance, my heart racing. The attendant still stood behind the counter, his eyes unyielding, like two chips of ice. "What was that?" I demanded. "Just a stray. They come through here sometimes," he replied, his tone flat. "Best to ignore them." Ignoring her seemed impossible. The look in her eyes haunted me. There was something primal about her fear, something that stirred an instinct deep within me. But I couldn't shake the unease that crept into my bones. All I wanted was to fill up my tank and get back on the road. "Are you sure you're open?" I asked, feeling the words slip out before I could stop myself. There was an off-balance aura about the place, a sense that time had stopped, leaving me in a liminal space. The attendant's smile turned thin, and he leaned forward. "You'll find the world outside isn't what it seems. Sometimes, it's safer to stay where you are." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to leave, the air heavy with tension. Just as I reached for the door, I felt it before I heard it, a low growl emanating from the shadows beyond the gas station. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke on my forehead as the growl morphed into a blood-curdling scream. I froze, caught between the urge to flee and the need to understand. In the stillness that followed, I knew I would never forget that night or the strange gas station that had ensnared me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow hue over the dingy interior of the gas station. I leaned against the counter, waiting for the cashier, a middle-aged man with a scraggly beard and bloodshot eyes, to finish his conversation with the elderly woman in front of me. She seemed oblivious to the world around her, her frail hands gripping a faded lottery ticket like it was a lifeline. I glanced out the window at the darkening sky, the last light of day swallowed by the approaching storm. It had been a long drive, one I had hoped would be behind me by now, but the tire blowout had left me stranded miles from the nearest town. After pulling into the station, I had taken a moment to gather myself, but the eerie quiet of the place made my skin crawl. There was something unsettling about the way the shadows danced in the corners, as if they were alive, watching me. As the old woman shuffled away, I stepped forward, ready to pay for a bottle of water and a bag of chips. The cashier barely glanced at me, counting coins with the same mechanical precision as a robot. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, and I wondered how long he had been trapped in this place. It felt like a purgatory more than a pit stop. "How much for the water?" I asked, trying to break the ice, but he just grunted in response. I placed a few crumpled bills on the counter, and he shoved the change back at me without a word. I pocketed it and turned to leave, but as I stepped outside, I felt a chill skitter down my spine. The storm had arrived, bringing with it a stifling humidity and the smell of damp earth. I filled my car with gas, the nozzle clanging against the metal as I fumbled to keep my balance. A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the air, and I quickened my pace, eager to get back on the road. Just as I finished and replaced the nozzle, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I turned, expecting to see the cashier or perhaps another patron, but instead, I faced the woman from inside. Her face was gaunt, hollowed by time and worry, but her eyes sparkled with a disturbing intensity. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that seemed to slice through the thick air. I stepped back, feeling an inexplicable urge to flee. "What do you mean?" I stammered, unsure of whether I was supposed to indulge this strange encounter or simply retreat to the safety of my car. "Bad things happen here," she continued, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the darkened woods beyond the gas station. "They come out when it rains. They wait for someone like you." I forced a chuckle, hoping to dispel the tension. "I really just need to get back on the road." Her expression twisted into something resembling pity. "You think you can outrun them? You can't outrun what's already inside you." Before I could respond, she turned abruptly, her frail body disappearing into the thickening shadows behind the station. I felt a chill settle deep within me, the air thickening as if the storm had unleashed more than just rain. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the encounter as mere madness, but her words echoed in my mind. I hurried back to my car, the rain beginning to pound down around me, a relentless drumming that drowned out all else. I started the engine, but the sound of the storm rattled my nerves. I wanted to leave, needed to leave, but I hesitated, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were my only connection to reality. Just then, the lights flickered, and I glanced up to see the cashier watching me through the window, his gaze piercing and unsettling. A shiver ran down my spine. For a fleeting moment, I felt like a rabbit in a snare, trapped in a world that had no intention of letting me go. As I prepared to back out, I noticed something moving in the corner of my vision, a flicker of motion at the edge of the gas station lot. I turned, squinting through the downpour, but saw nothing. My heart raced, and I decided it was time to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place. But just as I shifted into reverse, the gas station's neon sign sputtered and died. The darkness enveloped me, and I felt a primal fear take hold. The only light was the faint glow of my headlights slicing through the rain. I gritted my teeth, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I pressed the accelerator, but the car lurched forward and stalled. The engine sputtered like it was choking on something unseen. Panic clawed at my throat, and I twisted the key in the ignition, willing it to start. Nothing. I glanced at the gas station, its outline now a looming shadow against the stormy backdrop. The cashier stood motionless in the window, a dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around him. I felt as if he was waiting for me, watching, but I didn't dare step outside. With a pounding heart, I tried the ignition again, but all I got was silence. The rain hammered down, drowning out my frantic thoughts. I was trapped, marooned in a place that felt like a nightmare. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from the back of the car. I held my breath, straining to listen. It grew louder, more insistent, a scraping that sent a bolt of ice through my veins. The headlights illuminated the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a figure darting behind me, something pale and thin, a specter in the rain. I whipped around, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just the relentless storm and the oppressive weight of the gas station looming in the distance. I needed to get out, needed to escape whatever shadow loomed over this damned place, but as I fumbled with the ignition once more, I realized that this was just the beginning. The shadows had grown long by the time I pulled off the winding road and into the gravel lot of Bryce's Gas and Go. Neon lights flickered sporadically above the entrance, casting a dim glow that barely penetrated the encroaching darkness. The place was far from inviting. The peeling paint and rusted sign hinted at a past better forgotten. I had seen it from the road, a solitary beacon in the vast emptiness that stretched for miles. My trusty old sedan wheezed as I parked, the exhaust releasing a final puff of smoke before surrendering to silence. Stepping out, I was greeted by a chill that crept through my jacket, gnawing at my bones. The wind carried a scent that was oddly metallic, mixing with the stale odor of gasoline. I hesitated for a moment, scanning the lot, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows. The glass door to the store creaked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating shelves cluttered with goods that appeared to have been untouched for ages. A half-hearted display of snacks sat beside a dusty soda machine, its bright colors faded and peeling. I walked deeper into the store, my steps echoing against the linoleum floor. The clerk sat behind the counter, his form slouched like a forgotten rag doll. He had a scruffy beard and wore a cap that hid most of his face. I cleared my throat, but he didn't respond, just stared blankly at the muted television in the corner. A sense of unease settled over me, and I had to remind myself that this was just a gas station, nothing more than a pit stop on my journey. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely cutting through the thick air. "I need to fill up." He didn't look at me. Instead, he gestured vaguely toward the door behind him. "Pumps outside," he mumbled, his voice gravelly and hoarse. I nodded, even though he hadn't bothered to make eye contact. As I stepped back into the chilly night, I felt an uncomfortable prickling on the back of my neck, warning me that I wasn't truly alone. I walked to the pump, the gravel crunching underfoot, the night filled with the distant sound of something rustling in the bushes. As I unscrewed the gas cap, I could see my breath in the cold air. I focused on the task at hand, squeezing the trigger of the pump. The hissing of fuel filled the silence, but my mind was elsewhere. Perhaps it was the isolation that amplified my paranoia, or maybe it was the unsettling atmosphere of the place. Either way, I felt like I was being watched. A rustle nearby made me turn sharply, my heart racing. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man who had been lurking beside a row of old tires. He looked disheveled, with unkempt hair and clothes that seemed 2 sizes too big. I forced myself to look away, trying to convince myself that he was just another traveler. But the way he watched me, with those piercing eyes that held too much intensity, made my skin crawl. I hurried back to the sedan, not daring to meet his gaze any longer. The gas gauge clicked, signaling I was full, and I replaced the nozzle with trembling hands. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of the clerk standing in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow aware of everything happening around him. I started the engine, the car rumbling to life as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still there, watching. I forced myself to look away and pulled out of the lot, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I accelerated into the dark. The road stretched before me, an unending ribbon of asphalt carved into the bleak landscape. I tried to focus on the driving, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I glanced back at the gas station once more. It loomed behind me like a specter, the neon lights flickering, an unwelcome reminder of my stop. As I drove deeper into the night, the landscape began to shift. Trees lined the road, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The further I went, the more isolated I felt, the weight of the darkness pressing against my car. It felt like a cocoon, enveloping me, while every instinct screamed that I should turn back. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights caught something on the side of the road, an outline that sent chills racing down my spine. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement as I skidded to a halt. Hardly believing what I was seeing, I peered through the windshield. There, illuminated by my headlights, was the figure of a woman. She stood motionless, her hair matted and dirty, clothes torn as if she had been living out here. I couldn't read her expression. It was as if she was trapped in a haze of despair. My chest tightened with dread. I rolled down the window, my heart pounding. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The words felt inadequate, slipping into the night like whispers lost in the wind. She turned her head slowly, and the moment our eyes met, I recoiled in horror. Her eyes were vacant, as if she were staring right through me. In an instant, she lunged toward my car, her hands outstretched, mouth opening in a silent scream. I slammed the car into gear and sped away, the thud of my heart echoing in my ears. I drove blindly, The road blurred beneath me as panic surged. Behind me, I could have sworn I saw the shadow of the gas station fading into the darkness, but I didn't dare look back. All I wanted was to escape, but the feeling of being hunted settled deep in my gut, and I feared it would never let me go. The neon sign flickered above the gas station, its dance of red and green casting unsettling shadows on the cracked pavement. I stood at the pump, the heavy scent of gasoline mingling with something far more acrid, something that lingered around the edges of my consciousness like a warning. The last remnants of daylight were fading, leaving the sky a bruised shade of purple. I had been driving for hours, my mind slipping into the rhythm of the road, the hum of the tires against the asphalt a soothing lullaby. But now, all that comfort had evaporated, replaced by an uneasy tension that gripped my chest. I glanced around. The station was deserted, save for a flickering fluorescent light overhead. My eyes darted to the old wooden shack that served as the convenience store. Its windows were clouded with grime, and I could barely make out the silhouettes of what looked like old, dusty snacks and faded magazines. A chill crept down my spine as I recalled the unsettling feeling from the previous chapter of my journey, a sense of being watched that had not quite faded. I forced myself to focus on filling my tank. The click of the pump felt hollow in the stillness, echoing into the void like a heartbeat. My thoughts flickered back to the rumors I had heard in town about this gas station. Tales of disappearances, of travelers who had stopped for fuel and never been seen again. Had I truly believed those whimsical stories? Or had my fear tethered me to this moment, drawing me back to it like a moth to a flame? As I stood there, I sensed movement from the corner of my eye. I turned my head sharply. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with a scruffy beard and a worn baseball cap, his face mostly obscured by the brim. His clothes hung loosely around him, remnants of a once vibrant shirt faded into a muted gray. He approached slowly, his steps deliberate, as if he were measuring the distance between us carefully. "Need anything?" he called out in a voice that was gravelly, a hint of a southern drawl coloring his words. I hesitated, my instinct to flee surfacing as I forced a smile. "Just getting gas." "Long drive?" he asked, moving closer. The closer he got, the more I could see the lines etched into his skin, the weariness of years spent under the sun. "Yeah, just passing through," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "On my way to." "Best keep moving," he interjected, his eyes narrowing. "This place isn't what it used to be." I raised an eyebrow, trying to gauge whether he was being friendly or just plain ominous. "What do you mean?" "People come and go, but they don't always leave," he said, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "You ever hear about the girl?" I swallowed hard. The tales of the girl popped into my mind like a lightning bolt. A young woman who had vanished without a trace, leaving the town to whisper about her fate. "What happened to her?" I asked, an involuntary shiver racking my body. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Last seen at this very station. Filled up her car, just like you. Then, poof." He gestured with his hand, a sweeping motion that made my stomach knot. "Gone." I tried to shake off the dread that settled over me like a thick fog. "I should probably get going," I said, gripping my phone tightly in my pocket, the weight of its presence my only safety net comforting against my palm. "Just remember, it's not just the gas that's dangerous around here," he continued, his smile fading, replaced by a more serious expression. "Trust no one." I didn't want to entertain the notion that I might be in danger. He was just an eccentric local, right? Perhaps a harmless oddball with a penchant for stories that stretched the truth. Yet, the way he stared at me made my blood run cold. Something in his gaze hinted at knowledge, a familiarity with the darkness that lurked in the corners of the world. I finished pumping my gas, trying to keep a steady hand. I could feel his eyes on me as I replaced the nozzle, the tension thick enough to slice through. With a final glance toward the store, I noticed the flickering light seemed to pulse with a life of its own, almost beckoning me to come inside. "Hey!" The man's voice broke through my fog. "Watch yourself." He nodded toward the shadows behind the gas station where the trees loomed, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. "There are things out there that you don't want to meet." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back toward the shadows from which he had come, leaving me alone with my racing heart. I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors with trembling hands. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him watching me from the darkness. But the only reflection was my own, pale and wide-eyed. I turned the keys in the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and as I pulled away from the gas station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something sinister. The road stretched out ahead of me, but my thoughts were heavy with the weight of his words. As the gas station receded behind me, the sky darkened further, and a sense of foreboding lingered in the air. I could still hear the echo of his voice warning me to trust no one. I had no idea what lay ahead on the winding roads, but I knew one thing for sure: I would be keeping my eyes wide open from now on. The rain had picked up, blurring the world outside into a wash of gray and black when I stumbled upon the gas station. I wasn't entirely sure how long I had been driving, only that I was desperate for a reprieve from the oppressive solitude of the road. The flickering neon sign that read "Open 24 hours" seemed like a lighthouse in a storm, pulling me toward the promise of warmth and company. As I parked my car, the air thickened with the scent of wet asphalt and something else, something oily and uninviting. I squinted at the gas pumps, rusty and weathered, their nozzles hanging like skeleton hands. The station was one of those relics of the past, with peeling paint and a roof that drooped inwards, weighed down by the incessant rain. I hesitated, a creeping sense of dread wrapping around my spine like a cold hand, but my need for fuel was greater than my trepidation. Pushing the door open, I was greeted by the monotonous hum of the overhead fluorescent lights, struggling against the shadows that clung to the corners. The clerk, a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that seemed to have taken up permanent residence on his face, looked up from his magazine. His gaze was both curious and dull, as if he were accustomed to seeing too much and too little all at once. "Need anything?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. I nodded, grimacing as I approached the counter. "Just some gas and maybe a snack." His lips stretched into a thin smile, revealing teeth that were more yellow than white. "Pump number 3. We got chips and soda over there." He gestured with a hand that seemed to hang in the air, poised between offering help and dismissing me. I filled up my tank, the sound of the gas sloshing into the tank oddly comforting in the otherwise oppressive silence. There was something about the way the station loomed, its edges blurred by the relentless downpour, that set my heart racing. I felt eyes upon me, but every time I glanced toward the windows, I found nothing but rain and darkness. Returning inside, I grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, the bright packaging a stark contrast to the dimness around me. As I approached the counter, I noticed a strange assortment of items behind the clerk: rusty tools, expired snacks, and what looked like a few old photographs. I found my gaze lingering on one in particular, a faded image of the gas station from decades ago, when it still looked new and alive. A colorful family stood proudly in front of it, smiling, their joy a sharp contrast to the desolation that now inhabited the place. "Who's in that picture?" I asked, intrigued despite myself. The clerk's expression soured, the corners of his mouth tightening. "Old owners. Long gone." "Gone?" I repeated, a shiver creeping up my spine. "Yeah." His tone had shifted, as if I had probed a wound best left untouched. "You don't need to worry about them." I paid for my items, my curiosity replaced with an unshakable unease. As I turned to leave, the fluorescent lights flickered, plunging the station momentarily into darkness. My heart raced, the quietness amplifying the sound of water streaming down the windows. Just as abruptly, the lights returned, but I felt a change in the atmosphere, an electric tension that prickled against my skin. I stepped outside, and the rain had intensified, drumming against the roof of my car like a warning. I jumped into the driver's seat, locking the doors instinctively. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as I took a moment to collect myself. I glanced back at the gas station, and that was when I saw him. The clerk stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the glow of the lights inside, watching me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I shook my head, dismissing the feeling of paranoia. I had to get back on the road, to leave this odd little stop behind. I shifted into drive, peering out through the rain-smeared windshield. But as I turned away from the station, I caught sight of something moving in the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting just outside the edge of the station's glow. I blinked, and it was gone. The road stretched ahead, but a gnawing feeling nagged at me, urging me to look back again. I fought against it, focusing on the asphalt ahead, feeling the weight of the rain-hummed sky pressing down. I was almost relieved when I finally reached a small bend in the road that obscured the station from view, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a phantom sensation that clung to me like the dampness of my clothes. My mind raced through the bleak shadows of that gas station. The clerk's hollow eyes, the faded picture, the looming presence of something I could not name. I had managed to shake off the worst of my fears, but as the rain continued to lash against my windshield, the edges of my thoughts began to fray. What had happened in that gas station? What had the clerk meant by long gone? I pressed down on the gas, urging my vehicle to move faster. In the rearview mirror, the road receded into the unrelenting rain, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that forsaken place. The headlights pierced through the storm, illuminating a world that felt both alien and familiar, yet I was acutely aware that I had driven deeper into a darkness that wasn't merely the absence of light. It was something else entirely, something that crawled beneath my skin, whispering promises of an inevitability I could not escape. Story 4, Vacation to the Edge of Dread. The itinerary had promised a weekend of relaxation, a much-needed break from the monotony of daily life. I imagined lounging on the sun-kissed beaches of Oakhaven, the salty breeze tugging at my hair, and the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Instead, I found myself seated in a cramped bus, inching my way down a narrow, winding road flanked by thick foliage that pressed against the windows like dark arms reaching for us. Oakhaven was a small coastal town, distant from the hustle and bustle of city life, and I longed for the tranquility it promised. But as the hours dragged on, I could already feel unease settling in the pit of my stomach. The bus jolted to a sudden stop, and I noted how the driver's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The other passengers exchanged glances, confusion spreading like wildfire. "What's going on?" I muttered, half to myself. "Technical difficulties," the driver announced, his voice thick with irritation. "Just give me a moment." I peered out the window, half expecting to see something unusual, but the landscape looked as unremarkable as it had for the past hour. The trees, tall and imposing, formed a green tunnel that swallowed up any hint of light. I shifted my weight, wanting nothing more than to escape the confines of the bus. The driver's frustrated mutterings were drowned out by an unsettling silence that enveloped us. Other passengers shifted in their seats, each weighing the idea of getting out and stretching their legs. I was tempted to join them, but felt tethered to my seat by an invisible thread of apprehension. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bus lurched back to life, and we continued down the road, the tension easing slightly among us. As we finally rolled into Oakhaven, I was struck by its eerie stillness. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that cloaked the streets. The quaint buildings, painted in faded colors, looked as though they had been forgotten by time. No bustling tourists or cheerful locals greeted us, just the quiet whispers of the evening wind. I felt an odd chill creep down my spine as I stepped off the bus. I pulled my suitcase behind me, following the sparse crowd towards the inn where I had booked a room. The sign creaked ominously in the fading light, and I paused, taking in the flaking paint and cracked windows. The proprietor, a wiry old man with a face etched by years of hardship, welcomed me with a curt nod. "You're here for the weekend?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Just a couple of days," I replied, forcing a smile, though I couldn't shake the feeling that he was scrutinizing me, as if he could read my thoughts. Once inside my room, I dropped my suitcase and ran my fingers over the dusty dresser. I opened the window, hoping to let in fresh air, but all I got was the heavy scent of something rotten lingering in the distance. My stomach twisted, but I dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Night fell quickly, blanketing the town in darkness. I decided to take a walk, eager to shake off the unease that had settled over me. As I stepped outside, I found the streets deserted, the only sounds being the distant crashing of waves and the rustle of leaves. It felt strange, as if the town held its breath, waiting for something to happen. I wandered down toward the beach, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Flickering street lamps created ominous shadows that danced along the ground, and I felt the weight of eyes upon me, though I saw no one. The moon hung low, its glow barely illuminating the path ahead. That was when I noticed the shapes on the beach. Figures huddled in the sand, their movements jerky and unnatural. I squinted, trying to discern what they were doing, but the darkness swallowed any detail. A shiver crept along my spine, urging me to retreat. Yet, curiosity tugged at me, propelling me forward. As I approached, the figures became more distinguishable. They were not just people. They looked as if they had washed ashore, pale and disheveled. My breath hitched in my throat when I caught sight of their faces, twisted in expressions of anguish. I turned to flee, but it was too late. A low, guttural sound echoed from behind me, and I felt the presence of something far worse than anything I could have imagined. The figures were not just lost souls, they were vessels of despair, and I had stumbled upon something I was never meant to see. I ran back toward the inn, the pounding of my heart drowning out the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I could still feel their cold eyes on me, pulling me back into the darkness. I fumbled with the key, my hands trembling as I opened the door and slammed it shut behind me. The room felt suffocating, the shadows pressing in closer. I leaned against the door, trying to calm my racing heart, but every creak of the old building sent jitters through me. Outside, an unnatural stillness had settled over Oakhaven, as if the night itself conspired to keep its secrets hidden. I knew I had to leave, but something deep within me hesitated, paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. The town had promised peace, yet I felt it gnawing at my sanity, whispering dread into the corners of my mind. As I lay in bed, the dark thoughts coiling tightly around me, I couldn't help but wonder what had I truly awakened in Oakhaven. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a grim orange hue over the dilapidated town of Elder Spring. I stood at the edge of the overgrown road, my luggage heavy in my hand and my heart thundering in my chest. The excitement I had felt earlier in the day had curdled into something darker, something that whispered of dread and unease. I had come to Elder Spring seeking a quaint getaway, a chance to escape the frenetic pace of city life. The glowing reviews online spoke of cozy inns and friendly locals, a picturesque escape filled with charming scenery and leisurely strolls. But as I gazed at the crumbling buildings, their windows like hollow eyes staring into the void, I wondered if I had made a mistake. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the town were holding its breath, waiting. I trudged forward, the gravel crunching underfoot, a sound that felt too loud in the heavy silence. The inn I had booked was at the end of the road, a fading sign creaking in the breeze. The Whispering Pines Inn, it read, though the trees surrounding it had long since surrendered their vitality. I could barely make out the outline of the place, shrouded in shadow and ivy. Upon arrival, the innkeeper greeted me with an unsettling grin that sharpened the wariness in my gut. Her name was Agnes, and her eyes glimmered with an intensity that felt unnerving. She gave me a once-over and gestured for me to follow her inside. The wood door creaked ominously as it swung open, and I stepped into the dim lobby. It was as if I had walked into a time capsule. The furniture appeared to be from a different era, and the air smelled of mildew mixed with something I couldn't quite place. "Welcome to the Whispering Pines," Agnes murmured, her voice smooth yet gravelly, like stones scraping against one another. "You'll find the rooms quite comfortable. We like to keep things traditional here." I forced a smile, but her gaze seemed to pierce through me, as if she could read my thoughts. I followed her to my room, a narrow hallway lined with pictures of people I didn't recognize. Their faces were frozen in time, the smiles too wide and eyes too hollow. I tried to shake off the disquiet and focused on my surroundings. The room was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the overgrown garden. I dropped my bag on the bed and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I turned to close the window, but a chill crept in, causing goosebumps to rise on my skin. Outside, the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying restlessly in the wind. As night draped its cloak over Elder Spring, I felt an irresistible urge to explore. I needed to shake the sensation that I was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. I stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I meandered toward the town center, where faint lights flickered like dying stars. The streets felt abandoned, and I encountered only a handful of people, their faces etched with worry. One woman, her hair wild and unkempt, clutched her child tightly and hurried past me, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to pounce from the shadows. I couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. I wandered into a small cafe that still had its lights on. The atmosphere was tense, the chatter stilted, as patrons stole glances at me. I approached the counter and ordered a coffee, hoping it would ground me. The barista, a young man with dark circles under his eyes, served me with a tight-lipped smile, but his hand shook slightly as he handed over the cup. "First time in Elder Spring?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Just here for a little vacation." He studied me for a moment, then leaned closer, the shadows of the cafe cloaking him. "Just be careful," he whispered. "Not everything here is what it seems." A chill ran down my spine. I thanked him and retreated to a corner table, pondering his cryptic words. The coffee was bitter and cold, but I drank it down, hoping to dispel the gathering fog of anxiety. I knew I would have to go back to the inn soon, but the thought filled me with dread. Leaving the cafe, I felt it again, the sensation of being watched. The streetlights flickered ominously, and as I turned to head back, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the street, just beyond the reach of the light. I squinted, trying to make out who it was, but just as I did, the figure vanished, swallowed by the darkness. I stumbled back, heart pounding. It was ridiculous. It was just my imagination. Yet, as I walked back toward the inn, cold fingers of fear gripped my spine, warning me that something was very wrong in Elder Spring. Upon reaching the inn, I hesitated before entering. The once cozy exterior now loomed over me like a predator waiting for its prey. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing through the empty lobby. Agnes stood behind the desk, her smile too wide, her eyes glinting with a strange light. "Back already? I trust you enjoyed your little jaunt." I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Just exploring a bit." "Good," she replied, tilting her head slightly, as if studying me. "You should stay close, dear. Elder Spring has its secrets, and not all of them are friendly." The words wrapped around me like a cold shroud, and I shivered. What had I walked into? I climbed the stairs to my room, anxiety pooling in my stomach. As I settled in for the night, I tried to drown out the whispers in my mind with thoughts of how beautiful the town was supposed to be. But sleep eluded me, and the shadows danced at the edges of my consciousness, teasing me with dreams of things unseen, waiting just beyond the veil of night. The following day, the chill in the air seeped through the walls of our rented cabin like a phantom seeking warmth. I woke to the dull thud of my heart and the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees. The memories of the night before clung to me like a second skin, a heavy reminder of our earlier debauchery and the uneasy sense that something was wrong with our little mountain getaway. I glanced at the clock, the hands betraying the early hour. Sarah was still asleep, her dark hair tangled across the pillow, forming an inky halo. I threw on a hoodie and stepped outside, the wooden door creaking ominously behind me. The cool morning air stunned my lungs as I inhaled deeply, searching for clarity among the fog that clung to the mountains. The woods were eerily quiet. No birds sang, the usual chatter of rustling leaves had given way to an unsettling silence. I recalled our earlier hikes, where laughter echoed through the trees. Now, only the whisper of the wind accompanied me, and it felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. As I stood there, a shiver ran down my spine. I turned to head back inside when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement deep in the underbrush. I squinted, but it was gone, just like that. Probably just a deer or some other forest creature, I told myself, though a primal instinct told me to be cautious. I returned to the cabin, shaking off the unease. Sarah was awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting slats of golden light across her face. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. I hesitated. "Yeah, I did. I lied. How about you?" She shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Better than last night, that's for sure. Thank God for coffee." We spent the morning preparing for our hike, the conversation light and buoyant though a weight lingered in the back of my mind. Each time I glanced toward the trees, I felt a pull, an irrational urge to step into the shadows and uncover whatever secrets lay hidden there. After breakfast, we donned our hiking gear and ventured towards the trailhead. The path wound deeper into the forest, flanked by towering pines that looked more like silent sentinels than cheerful companions. The gnarled roots threatened to trip us as we climbed, but each step felt invigorating. With every rise of the trail, the view behind us improved, rolling hills and distant valleys painted in the early hues of autumn. It was halfway through our hike that I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air turned thick, charged with an energy I couldn't describe. I stole a glance at Sarah, who seemed oblivious, entranced by the scenery. The moment was blissful, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we were not alone. We reached a clearing, a small plateau that offered a magnificent view of the valley below. I caught my breath, taking in the vast stretches of trees painted with fall colors, but the beauty was marred by an inexplicable tension. I found myself scanning the tree line, my instincts on high alert. "Isn't it beautiful?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a lilt of excitement. "Yeah," I replied, but my gaze drifted toward the woods. Then I saw it again, movement. A shadow slipped between the trees, something much larger than a deer, and my stomach twisted. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart pounding. "See what?" she replied, turning to follow my gaze. "Nothing," I muttered, forcing a smile. "Just a rabbit or something." We lingered at the edge of the clearing for a while longer, but the unease festered beneath the surface. Sarah suggested we head back, and I agreed, eager to leave the unsettling energy behind. As we retraced our steps, the shadows lengthened, and I felt the forest close in around us, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. My breath quickened as I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to find someone or something behind us. And that's when I heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing in the lonely earth behind us. I whipped around, but nothing was there, just the dense thicket stretching endlessly, Did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hear what? Sarah looked puzzled. Nothing, I replied, forcing a laugh, though it felt hollow. The footsteps persisted, synchronized with our hurried steps, a taunting echo that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. I picked up the pace, and Sarah followed suit, her brow furrowed in confusion. Just as we reached the edge of the woods, the sound ceased, swallowed by the cacophony of nature. We burst into the clearing, and for a brief moment, I felt a surge of relief. But it was fleeting, the sense of being watched intensified, as if unseen eyes bore into our backs. Let's head back to the cabin, I said, trying to maintain a sense of calm. We walked in silence, the tension palpable between us. As we approached the cabin, the door was ajar, swinging slowly on its hinges. My stomach dropped. I was certain we had locked it before we left. Did you forget to lock up? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. I stammered, stepping inside. The cabin felt different now, as though it had absorbed the chill of the air outside. A feeling of dread settled in my chest as I surveyed the room. Everything looked untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I glanced at Sarah, who seemed increasingly uneasy. Maybe we should just leave, she suggested, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from the other room, followed by a heavy silence that seemed to stretch and pull, like a tightening noose. We exchanged terrified glances, and in that moment, the woods beyond our cabin felt far more inviting than the darkness looming within. The sun had set behind the jagged outline of the mountains, casting long shadows across the narrow road that wound through the forest. I sat in the passenger seat of Jack's old Subaru, the hum of the engine a constant undertone to the crackling silence that enveloped us. It had been 3 days since we arrived at the secluded cabin, a supposed paradise tucked away from the chaos of our hectic lives. 3 days of splendor marred by an unshakable sense of dread. Jack, oblivious to my unease, navigated the winding path, his face illuminated by the weak glow of the dashboard lights. It's just a few more minutes, he reassured me, glancing my way with a smile that felt too bright for the encroaching darkness. We'll be there soon. Right, I replied, forcing a smile in return. The back of my mind nagged at me, the feeling that something was wrong gnawing at my stomach. I looked out the window, watching the darkened trees blur past, their twisted forms looming like specters. A heavy mist began to roll in, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the car and swallowing it whole. As the visibility dwindled, Jack swore under his breath. Damn fog. I can barely see 10 feet ahead. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. I should have taken the longer route. I attempted to quell the rising tide of anxiety that surged through me. Are we close to the cabin? Yeah, just up ahead. He shook his head as if to clear it. It should be right after we turn this corner. I leaned forward, squinting into the murky darkness. Suddenly, the headlights caught something in the road, something large and dark. Jack! I shouted, but it was too late. The rear wheel skidded, and the car jolted violently before we came to a halt, the engine sputtering. What the hell was that? Jack's eyes were wide, scanning the road ahead. The fog seemed to deepen, swirling around us like a living entity. I didn't see anything. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The fog enveloped me instantly, wrapping around me like a shroud. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what had obstructed our path. My heart raced as I noticed the silhouette on the side of the road. It was a figure, hunched and motionless, almost blending in with the shadows. Get back in the car. Jack's voice rose in urgency, pulling me from my trance. What is that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper as I took a step closer. Just get in, he shouted, panic lacing his words. I could hear the tremor in his breath. Reluctantly, I retreated, the impulse to flee battling with an insatiable curiosity. As I climbed back inside, the fog rolled in thicker, and the figure seemed to dissolve into the mist. "Did you see what it was?" I asked, my hands trembling as I gripped the door handle. "No," he looked straight ahead, jaw clenched. "But we can't stay here. We need to find a way back to the cabin." Before he could shift the car into gear, a loud thud against the side of the vehicle startled us both. I shrieked, and Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, his face paling. "What was that?" "I don't know." I could barely breathe, my heart hammering against my chest. I leaned forward, peering through the foggy window. Outside, the world had turned into a whirling mass of shadows and whispers, the darkness alive with an unsettling energy. "We have to leave," Jack said, panic filtering through his voice. But before he could move, the figure reappeared, standing just outside the driver's side window. It was a man, his face obscured by the mist, but I could see the glint of wild eyes and a ragged smile that sent chills down my spine. Jack slammed on the horn, but the man didn't flinch. He simply stood there, swaying slightly, as if he were caught in some invisible wind. The air grew thick with tension, and I felt as if the atmosphere had shifted, becoming heavier, the weight of malevolence pressing against the car. "Who are you?" Jack shouted, his voice cracking. The man leaned closer, his breath fogging up the window. "Lost, are we?" he croaked, the words slithering through the air like a serpent. "So many get lost on this road. Get away from the car." I screamed, my voice shrill with terror. He didn't budge. Instead, he pressed his face against the glass, his breath creating a mist that fogged my view of the outside world. "It's better to join them than to wander alone," he rasped, his smile stretching impossibly wide. Jack gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles shone. "I'm calling the police," he said, fumbling for his phone. But when he glanced down, the screen was black, the battery drained. "What the hell?" The man outside began to laugh, a guttural sound that sent shivers racing down my spine. "No one comes here. No one hears your cries." In that moment, the fog thickened, and I felt a chill, an icy tendril of fear creeping into my bones. Something primal told me we needed to get out of there, but the road ahead seemed to twist into an eternal darkness. I shivered, staring into the unblinking eyes of the twisted figure watching us. "Back away from the window," I shouted, the urgency pressing at my throat. "Jack, drive." With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Jack threw the car into reverse. The man's laughter echoed in the stillness as we sped away, heart racing as the fog closed in around us like a suffocating blanket. I didn't know where the road would take us, but anything was better than being trapped in that chilling moment, lost in a nightmare that refused to let us go. The day dawned gray and heavy, a low mist creeping along the edges of the pine forest outside our cabin. I awoke with a start, the remnants of nightmares lingering in my mind like smoke. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. We had come to Pine Hollow for rest, for escape, but I sensed that the woods were alive, watching, waiting. Over breakfast, I tried to shake off the unease, but the silence in the small cabin was palpable. Jonathan chewed his toast, oblivious to my growing apprehension. Sarah, my younger sister, poked at her cereal, lost in thought. I peered out the window, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the trees, but all I found was the dull gray of the day, the landscape shrouded in mist. "Let's hike up to the overlook," Jonathan suggested, breaking the silence. "It'll do us good to get some fresh air." A part of me wanted to refuse, to stay cocooned inside the cabin where I felt safe, but I couldn't voice my fears. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. Sarah perked up at the idea, her eyes brightening. The hike started off innocently enough. The path wound through the trees, the soft crunch of leaves under our boots the only sound accompanying us. Jonathan led the way, his long strides eating up the distance. Sarah walked beside me, her chatter providing a welcome distraction from the tightening knot in my stomach. "I can't believe how beautiful it is here," she said, her voice bright. "It's like we're in a painting." "Yeah, a painting that's about to come alive," I muttered, half jokingly. Sarah shot me a quizzical look, but before she could respond, I glanced back at the trail behind us. The trees seemed thicker there, the shadows deeper. I shook my head, dismissing my unease as fatigue. As we climbed higher, the mist enveloped us like a shroud. The air grew colder, and the atmosphere thickened with an unseen weight. I stole glances at Jonathan, who walked ahead, his cheerful demeanor unshaken. I envied his carefree spirit, wishing I could share in his enthusiasm. We reached the overlook just as the clouds began to roil overhead. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of trees fading into gray. But the beauty felt ominous, as if the landscape held secrets best left undiscovered. I stepped closer to the edge, my heart racing, when a sudden chill swept over me. "Hey, look at that!" Sarah exclaimed, pointing toward a distant cabin nestled within the woods. I squinted, trying to make it out through the fog. It looked abandoned, the roof sagging, windows shattered like broken teeth. A shiver ran down my spine. "Let's go check it out," she said, excitement in her eyes. "No way," I replied, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We should head back." "Come on. It'll be fun." Sarah insisted, but I could see the stubbornness reflected in her brow. Jonathan seemed torn, glancing between us, but eventually he gave in to Sarah's enthusiasm. "All right, let's take a quick look," he said, and my heart sank. The descent was unsettling. The trees grew denser, the path narrowing as we ventured deeper into the woods. I felt an increasing sense of dread with every step, as if the very earth was conspiring against us. I lagged behind, wanting to turn back, but I didn't want to seem cowardly in front of Jonathan and Sarah. When we arrived at the cabin, the air turned still, the silence heavy. It loomed before us, dark and foreboding. The door hung ajar, creaking with a life of its own. I glanced at Jonathan, who seemed intrigued, and at Sarah, who was practically bouncing on her heels with excitement. "Let's go in," Jonathan said, pushing the door wide open. The hinges screamed in protest, and I felt a shudder run through me. I hesitated, a primal instinct urging me to flee. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like veils, and the floor creaked beneath our weight. An old table lay in the center of the room, its surface marred with scratches and stains that hinted at a dark past. "Gross," Sarah whispered, her voice muted. I stepped deeper into the cabin, my gut churning. The remnants of furniture were scattered around, a broken chair leaned against the wall, while a shattered mirror reflected only darkness. I noticed something scrawled across the wall, a warning, perhaps, "Leave while you can." "Guys, I think we should go," I urged, but my voice sounded small in the suffocating atmosphere. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the back of the cabin, a low, guttural growl that sent ice through my veins. Jonathan and Sarah froze, the color draining from their faces. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just an animal," Jonathan replied, but his bravado faltered. As we backed toward the door, I felt a weight settle on my chest, suffocating me. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, coiling around us in a macabre dance. I turned to flee, but before I could reach the door, something shattered the silence, a loud crash, followed by a thud that reverberated through the cabin. Panic surged through my veins, and I bolted toward the door, pulling Sarah with me. Jonathan was close behind us, his breath heavy with fear. We stumbled out into the clearing, the oppressive weight of the cabin lifting only slightly as we burst into the open air. But as I turned back, the mist rolled in deeper, obscuring the cabin from view. I could feel it, a terrible presence lingering just beyond the veil of fog, waiting, watching. My heart pounded in my chest, a primal warning echoing in my ears. "Let's get out of here," I gasped, dragging Sarah away from the cabin. Jonathan nodded, his face pale, and together we retraced our steps through the woods. The path felt treacherous now, the shadows looming larger with every step. Every rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, catching a glimpse of the cabin, now a mere silhouette in the mist. A chill ran through me as I realized the feeling of being watched had returned, stronger than before. The woods seemed alive around us, as if they were conspiring to keep us in their grasp. The sense of dread deepened, and I knew, deep down, that Pine Hollow would never let us go. Story 5, Depths of the Forgotten Abyss. The ocean had always held a certain magic for me, a vast blue expanse that whispered secrets in the waves and lured me into its depths. But the summer of 1987 was different. That summer, the ocean became something other, a dark mirror reflecting a terror I had never imagined. I joined the crew of the Sea Shadow, a commercial fishing boat that docked in Port Lark 2 weeks before the solstice. My father had been a fisherman, and I thought it fitting to continue the family tradition. I earned a meager wage, but the salt in the air and the rhythm of the ocean filled me with a kind of bravado. I was young, barely 20, and the world felt infinite. On the first day out, I felt the thrill that only the sea can provide. The boat rocked gently, its engine buzzing beneath me like a heartbeat. I remember standing at the bow, letting the wind whip through my hair, feeling the sun warm my skin. The other crew members were a rough-hewn bunch, men who spoke in gruff laughter and grumbled beneath their breath when a task required too much energy. They welcomed me with a mix of skepticism and camaraderie, content to keep their secrets close. Our captain, a seasoned man named Harlan, had an air of authority that was hard to ignore. He was a relic of the sea, with sun-leathered skin and eyes like starlit water. On the second day, as we set out to the deeper waters, he gathered us around him on the deck. "Listen up," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We're heading to the Devil's Reef. It ain't for the faint-hearted. You keep your eyes open, and your wits about you. The ocean has a way of swallowing fools whole." The laughter that erupted was nervous, a signal that the tension hung like a thick fog. I had heard whispers about the reef, stories of fishermen who had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the very ocean they revered. I brushed off the tales, thinking them the product of drunken nights and old men telling tall tales. As we reached the reef, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a sanguine hue across the waters. There was an unsettling stillness that enveloped us, as if the ocean held its breath, waiting. The waves lapped softly against the hull, muffling our conversations. I could feel the anticipation thick in the air, the collective heartbeat of my crewmates resonating with my own. With the nets cast, I busied myself, checking the gear and pretending to understand the intricacies of our task. Hours passed, and I still felt the tension strung tight around us. Harlan hadn't spoken since we dropped anchor, staring into the depths as if searching for something beyond our comprehension. I stole glances at him and saw a flicker of unease cross his features, an expression that sent a chill through me. Then came the scream. It shattered the stillness, high-pitched and raw, rising above the lapping waves. It was Mike, the youngest of us, just a year older than me. He had been at the edge of the boat, leaning over to peer into the dark water. I ran toward him, fear igniting a fire in my chest. When I reached him, he was pale and trembling, his eyes wide as if he had seen a ghost. "What did you see?" I asked, my voice almost lost to the wind. He pointed, his hand shaking. Something under the water. It was huge. I glanced over the edge, straining my eyes to pierce the depths, but all I saw was the shadowy expanse of the ocean, dark and inscrutable. I wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to nerves, but the way Mike trembled made something inside me twist. The crew gathered around Mike, their faces shifting from confusion to concern. Harlan finally broke the silence. "What did you see, Mike?" He stammered. "I don't know." It was bigger than anything I've ever seen. It moved fast, and there were teeth. Just teeth. The crew shifted uneasily, casting glances at each other. I felt the weight of their fear pressing down, transforming the air into lead. It felt as if the ocean was listening, waiting to see how we would react. The night settled in around us, and we continued to fish, though the energy had shifted. Conversations dwindled, laughter faded, replaced by a quiet tension that strained against the backdrop of the ocean's whispering. The darkness seemed to swell, as if the sea itself was alive, watching us. Hours passed before we began to haul in the nets. I was at the stern, pulling in the last of the catch when I felt something different, a shift in the current that sent a jolt through my body. My heart raced as my instinct screamed at me to look over the edge once more. I did, straining against the darkness. And there it was. A shadow, larger than the boat itself, gliding beneath the surface. I froze, the terror gripping me, paralyzing. The creature moved with a grace that belied its size, and the moonlight reflected faintly on its slick, dark body. I couldn't breathe, didn't want to breathe, as if the very act would draw it closer. Then, without warning, it broke the surface, a monstrous head rising from the water. Eyes like black voids locked onto mine, and I felt a chill seep into my bones. Screams erupted around me as I staggered back. The world blurred into chaos, my crewmates shouting, scrambling for safety. I stumbled, slipping on the slick deck, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature, its maw stretching impossibly wide. The ocean had never felt this alive before. It was a predator, a dark heart of the deep that had claimed more than its share of souls. In that moment, I realized I was not just a fisherman. I was prey, and the haunting expanse of water had turned into a living nightmare. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson hue across the water's surface. I stood on the deck of the research vessel, the MV Horizon, feeling the gentle sway of the ocean beneath my feet, but it was anything but tranquil. The air was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional creaking of the ship and the distant call of a gull. My heart raced with both anticipation and dread. We were miles from the nearest land, surrounded by an endless expanse of dark, glistening water. This was no ordinary expedition. We were here to study the deep-sea anomalies that had haunted local fishermen for years. It had all begun when Dr. Langley, our lead researcher, received strange reports from the fishermen of yonder bay. They spoke of strange lights in the water, of old, forgotten ships surfacing only to vanish again, and of deep-sea creatures that seemed less like animals and more like shadowy nightmares. The ocean was often thought of as a vast mystery, but it felt different now, a foreboding entity that stirred beneath the surface. That night, we gathered in the cramped laboratory below deck to review the day's findings. We had deployed a submersible to capture footage of the ocean floor, and Langley had been buzzing with excitement, urging us to prepare for the analysis. As I watched him pace, his fingers trembling with zeal, I felt an unsettling tug in my gut. "Tonight, we dive deeper than we ever have before," he declared, his eyes gleaming with fervor. "We'll launch the ROV again and investigate those readings from the eastern trench. Something is down there, something that wants to be found." There was a collective murmur of excitement mixed with apprehension. It was the thrill of discovery that propelled us, yet an instinctual warning nagged at the back of my mind. I had always been drawn to the ocean, but now its depths seemed to whisper unspeakable horrors, pulling me toward the unknown. As night cloaked the ship, I stood at the edge of the deck, staring out at the inky water. The moonlight painted everything in a silvery glow, but the shadows felt alive, shifting and swirling as if they were sentient. I could hear the faint hum of the machinery, the ROV being prepared for another descent. Behind me, the crew moved about, their voices reduced to murmurs, weighed down by an unspoken tension in the air. When the ROV was ready, Langley led the charge. A mix of excitement and fear coursed through me as I climbed onto the platform where the submersible was secured. The crew focused on their tasks, eyes fixed on the monitors that flickered to life, revealing a chaotic underwater landscape. The screen was filled with vibrant coral, strange formations, and shadowy shapes darting just beyond the reach of our lights. "Activate the sonar," Langley commanded, his voice sharp with determination. The sound echoed through the room, a low thrum that resonated with my chest. I felt a familiar twinge of anxiety, but I brushed it aside, immersing myself in the moment. Minutes stretched into hours as we engaged in our routine, but as we pressed deeper into the trench, the readings began to spike unnaturally. My heart leaped as Langley nodded, excitement etched across his face. "There's something down there," he whispered, more to himself than to us. The screen flickered, and I leaned in closer, straining to catch a glimpse of the anomaly. A sudden crash jolted me from my focus, and the lights flickered momentarily. An icy chill crept up my spine as I glanced around at my crewmates, their faces mirroring my own confusion and fear. "Was that a wave?" someone asked, their voice trembling. Langley shook his head, eyes darting toward the monitor. "No, it was something else. We need to check the feed." Suddenly, the screen erupted in static, the image warping into a series of fragmented shapes. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a creeping dread, as I studied the chaos of the visuals. And then it happened. A dark form, larger than anything I had ever encountered, loomed in the depths, its silhouette shifting as if it were made of shadows. "Get the lights on it," Langley ordered, nearly shouting. The crew scrambled, but before they could respond, the sonar echoed a warning, a deafening wail that pierced the silence. I clutched the edge of the table, my knuckles white with tension. The dark shape on the screen expanded, swirling like a storm as it surged toward the ROV in an unnatural movement. "Retrieve it. Bring it back." Langley's voice was frantic, urgency radiating from him. But it was too late. The dark entity struck with a force that rattled the boat, and the screen went black. Panic erupted among the crew, voices clashed as chaos took hold. I stood frozen, the realization seeping in. Whatever had been lurking beneath the surface had now turned its attention to us. Suddenly, a loud cry shattered the air, followed by silence. My blood ran cold. I turned, and the room felt too small, too claustrophobic. "What was that?" I managed to whisper. As we exchanged terrified glances, I knew in that moment that the ocean had claimed something from us, and it wasn't done yet. I could feel its presence, a palpable weight in the water surrounding us, an entity that stirred with purpose. The shadows on the screen danced again, and I took a step back, my mind racing with dread. We had unwittingly stirred the depths, and now we would face the consequences of our curiosity. As I looked back into the dark, open sea, I felt it beckoning me, an insatiable whisper that promised more horrors yet to come. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky transformed into a bruised twilight, the kind that made the ocean appear darker, more menacing. I stood on the deck of the old fishing trawler, the Resilient, staring into the abyssal expanse. The sounds of water slapping against the hull and the creaking of the wood beneath my feet filled my ears, mixing with the lingering taste of salt in the air. I hadn't slept well since we left the harbor. Dreams of something lurking beneath the waves haunted me, but I dismissed them as remnants of anxiety. "Mike." I turned at the sound of Jamie's voice, her silhouette framed by the dim, flickering light of the deck lamp. She was crouched by the edge of the boat, her face pale under the meager illumination. "You need to see this." I approached her, heart quickening. Jamie had always had a knack for finding trouble, though I had long since learned to follow our instincts. With trepidation, I looked over the side of the boat. The water shimmered unnaturally, an oily sheen stretching out like a dark hand reaching up from the depths. "What is that?" I asked, swallowing hard as unease wormed its way into my gut. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like this before." I squinted, trying to peer into the depths, but the darkness swallowed any attempts at clarity. My mind wandered to the creatures of the deep I had read about: giant squids, strange fish with bioluminescent bodies. I had laughed at the absurdity of their existence. But now, the reality of the ocean's vastness struck me with terrifying clarity. An unseen force stirred below, something that had no business being so close to us. A chill wind swept across the deck, rustling the nets we'd left out to dry. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Let's check the sonar. Maybe we can figure out what's causing it," I said, leading her toward the cabin. Inside, the screens flickered erratically, a slow burnout that mirrored my growing anxiety. I tapped the button, hoping for a clear blue line indicating a school of fish or a predictable ocean floor. Instead, the screen showed chaotic spikes, jagged lines that made no sense. "What the hell?" I muttered, frustration pooling within me. Jamie leaned over my shoulder, her brow furrowed. "It looks like something is moving beneath us," she observed, her voice trembling. "But it doesn't match any of the fish we've caught before." "Maybe it's just an anomaly," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt, but deep inside, I knew it felt far from normal. "We've been out here for weeks. Maybe the systems are just glitching." But as the words left my mouth, an unsettling thought crossed my mind. What if it wasn't a glitch? I turned back toward the deck, Jamie close behind. The ocean was darker now, the oily sheen spreading wider, almost sinister in its stillness. I could feel an unshakable dread settling over me as I scanned the horizon for any sign of other boats, other people. We had been out of contact for far too long, and the isolation felt like a heavy shroud closing in. As I leaned against the railing, my eyes darted to the water. A sudden movement caught my attention. Something breached the surface, sending a splash of dark liquid cascading into the air. My heart raced as I strained to see, but the flickering light played tricks on my vision. I caught glimpses of elongated shapes, writhing in a way that felt utterly alien. "Did you see that?" I breathed, my throat dry. I turned to Jamie, but she was staring past me, her eyes wide with terror. "Mike, behind you." I spun around just in time to see a shadow dart beneath the boat, cutting through the water with surprising speed. I took a step back, my breath hitching in my throat. Whatever it was bigger than I had imagined, more formidable. The ocean had become an entity unto itself, dark and indifferent. The air thickened with an unspeakable tension, a weight that made it difficult to breathe. "We need to get out of here," Jamie said, her voice shaky as she backed away from the edge. "Now!" I nodded, fear propelling my movements. I rushed into the cabin to grab the radio, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the knobs. "This is the Resilient. We need help. We're experiencing something," I stuttered, feeling foolish. The words sounded inadequate, trapped in the oppressive atmosphere. Static crackled through the speaker, but the familiar voice of the harbor was replaced by an ominous silence. The radio was dead. Panic coursed through me as I threw it down, my heart racing. I scanned the chaotic sonar readings once more. The dark spikes were closing in. "Mike, what's happening?" Jamie's voice quivered, drawing my attention back. I turned to her, swallowing against the tightening grip around my throat. "I don't know, but we can't stay out here." As if in response to my words, the boat lurched violently to one side. We both stumbled, the sound of wood cracking echoing through the night. I grabbed the railing, glancing over the edge, where the water churned violently. Something's under us. Jamie screamed, her eyes wide. The water erupted as a massive shape surged upward, breaking the surface. I gasped, a primal fear seizing my heart as the moonlight illuminated a vast, scaly body, slick and glistening, with eyes as dark as the depths. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a creature born from nightmares, rising from the abyss to claim us as its own. I barely registered Jamie's scream as I turned to run, adrenaline flooding my veins. The ocean had awakened, and our fight for survival had just begun. The night was a heavy shroud, the air thick with the brine of the sea and the weight of an unspoken fear. I had never been a superstitious man, yet the oppressive darkness seemed to breathe around us, wrapping the small boat in a suffocating embrace. Each wave that slapped against the hull echoed the tension that had built like a storm cloud in my guts since our descent into those murky depths. It had all begun with the sonar readings. At first, I was skeptical of Derek's enthusiasm. He had spent years discussing the mythical marine creatures of the ocean, but I believed in science, not fables. However, when he showed me the readings, unidentified forms lurking under the surface, deeper than we had ever ventured, I couldn't deny the thrill that rushed through me. It was that thrill that had led us to this moment, anchored in the pitch-black abyss. The engine had sputtered and died 4 hours into our dive. Stranded, we floated under the vast expanse of the Persian Gulf, our only light the weak beam of the boat's dying flashlight. Derek had tried to fix it, his hands slick with grease, but the machine had succumbed to the deep, just like us. "What now?" I asked, peering into the dark waters that threatened to swallow us whole. Derek was silent, his eyes scanning the swell of the ocean. The tension radiated from him, a palpable energy that set my teeth on edge. "We wait for the moon," he finally said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his bravado. As the minutes slipped by like grains of sand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from below, not some shadow of myth, but a genuine presence that lingered just beneath the surface. I imagined the ancient tales Derek once recounted, leviathans that roamed the deep, their monstrous forms hidden in the starlit darkness. Suddenly, the boat rocked violently. I clutched the side, my heart racing. "Did you feel that?" Derek nodded, his eyes wide, as he cautiously stood. "It could be a current," he suggested, though the quiver in his voice said otherwise. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows over the water. I could see the ripples now, more pronounced and chaotic, as if something large was moving just beyond our sight. My rational mind fought to reason away the fear, but a primal instinct clawed at my thoughts, insisting that we were not alone. "Let's use the radio," I said, hoping to cut through the tension with the possibility of rescue. But when I reached for the device, it crackled with static, a mocking sound that made bile rise in my throat. "It's dead," Derek cursed under his breath. "This isn't happening," he muttered, pacing the deck like a caged animal, his anxious energy palpable. I could sense the dread wrapping tighter around us, suffocating, as if the ocean itself was closing in. Then came the sound. At first, it was a soft thrumming, almost melodic, reverberating through the hull. I turned to Derek, who was frozen, listening intently. The melody grew louder, a deep hum that resonated within the very bones of the boat. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, both beautiful and terrifying. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, the fear in my voice unmistakable. Derek stepped to the edge of the boat, peering into the darkness. "I don't know," he breathed, his earlier bravado stripped away. As if in response, the water erupted. A massive, slick shape surged towards us, twisting and writhing, a creature unlike anything in our mortal comprehension. Its form was a dark silhouette against the moon, and as it breached the surface, I could see glistening scales and elongated limbs that seemed to defy nature. "Get back!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the cacophony of splashing and thrumming. The creature came closer, its eyes reflecting a cold intelligence, an awareness that ignited a primal terror within me. Derek stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief, but I couldn't look away. The creature circled us, its movements graceful yet menacing, as if it were toying with us. I could feel the cold grasp of despair tightening around my heart. With a sudden lunge, it struck the boat, sending us reeling. I lost my footing and crashed against the side, the world spinning. The boat tilted dangerously, water splashing over the sides, cold as ice. "Hold on!" Derek screamed, his voice barely audible over the chaos. But it was too late. The creature lunged again, this time breaching the hull, splintering wood and sending shards flying. I gasped as cold water rushed in, the ocean consuming us, dragging us down into its depths. Panic surged through me as I fought against the weight of the water, the darkness enveloping me. I clawed my way back to the surface, desperation pushing me onward. Above, the moon hummed like a distant beacon, but I could hear the thrumming and ominous promise of what awaited in the depths. I swam frantically, tasting salt and fear, but as I broke the surface, I looked around for Derek and found only the dark waves crashing around me. The creature had vanished back into the abyss, but something told me it was still there, lurking, waiting for the moment to strike again. As I gasped for breath, the night closed in around me, and I felt a chilling realization wash over me. The ocean was alive, and it was hungry. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into a palette of bruised purple and angry orange, casting an eerie glow over the restless waves. I stood at the edge of the fishing dock, my breath hitching with each gust of salty wind. The ocean had a voice tonight, deep and relentless, churning up memories I could hardly bear. It had been 3 days since the incident with the net. My mind had spiraled into a whirlpool of questions and fears that gnawed at my sanity like barnacles on a shipwreck. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something dark and lurking beneath the surface, watching and waiting. The fishermen talked in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the water as if it held secrets too terrible to share. I ran my fingers over the worn wooden railing, the splinters biting into my skin, a reminder of the reality I couldn't escape. The fishermen claimed they'd seen things out there, shadows that swirled beneath the waves, and strange silhouettes breaking the surface at odd angles. I wanted to dismiss their words as drunken stories, but deep down, a primal fear had begun to take root. I had experienced that inexplicable urge to turn back whenever my boat strayed too far into the depths, as if the water itself were a predator, hungry and omniscient. That evening, I had decided to head out alone. I believed that confronting whatever haunted me was the only way to reclaim my peace. I climbed into my small boat, the engine sputtering to life reluctantly. The familiar vibrations beneath my feet soothed my nerves, but as I pulled away from the dock, the silhouettes of the other boats, now mere shadows, faded into the encroaching twilight. The ocean stretched like an endless black sheet, with only the faintest shimmer of moonlight dancing on its surface. Each wave felt like a heartbeat, quickening and crashing against the hull of my boat. I had brought a single flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the waves that rose and fell like the chest of something alive. As I ventured further, I felt the weight of isolation settle around me. There were no other boats in sight, and the distant calls of gulls faded into a ghostly silence. It felt as if I were the only human in a vast expanse of liquid night. I turned off the engine and let the boat drift, the distant stars reflecting eerily in the water. That was when I first heard it, a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the depths. I strained to listen, and the sound became a haunting melody, a song of the sea that tugged at something deep within me. It was beautiful and terrifying, an invitation and a warning all at once. I clutched the sides of the boat, my heart racing. I felt as if the ocean were calling to me, urging me to lean over the edge and let it wrap around me. But then it shifted, morphed into something darker. I saw the water ripple unnaturally, rising and falling in a rhythm that was not of nature. My breath quickened as shadows formed beneath the surface, swirling in a dance that made my gut twist. I thought I saw something large move, a dark mass cutting through the water with a grace that was alarming. I fumbled for the flashlight, turning it toward the water, my hands trembling. There was nothing but the insatiable abyss, and yet I felt eyes upon me, as if whatever lurked below had taken notice of my presence. The hum grew louder, now intertwined with a discordant scraping, like nails against wood. The noise sent chills down my spine, and a surge of adrenaline propelled me to start the engine. But the engine sputtered and fell silent. Panic surged in my chest as I turned the ignition again and again, my heart pounding with dread. My flashlight flickered, the beam cutting a sporadic path through the darkness. I could see the surface of the water roiling, almost as if it were alive, as if it had a will of its own. That's when I saw it, a shape breaking the surface, something fast, smooth, and slick. It was not an animal I recognized, it defied nature itself. The moon illuminated it just enough for me to see the outline, its form glistening and shifting, as if it were a shadow made of water. I felt a scream clawing its way up my throat, but it felt stuck, lodged between terror and disbelief. Suddenly, the dark mass surged towards me, propelled by an unseen force. I stumbled back, my instinct screaming at me to jump into the water and swim for my life. But I was paralyzed, caught in a web of fear. The shadows surrounded my boat, a dark halo that pulsed like a heartbeat. The hum intensified, transforming into a cacophony of voices, echoing in my mind, resonating with something primal, something unspeakable. And then, in the blink of an eye, the surface of the water exploded. A monstrous tentacle shot up, glimmering with a slick sheen, arcing in the air like a whip. It crashed down with force, splintering the side of my boat. I felt the sting of splintering wood and the icy spray of seawater soaking me to the bone as I scrambled for the edge, trying to maintain my balance. In that chaotic moment, the voices reached a fever pitch, drowning out my thoughts. They sang of loss and despair, of sailors dragged into the depths, their souls consumed. The realization hit me like a stone. This was no myth or drunken tale. The ocean was not merely a body of water, it was a predator, a dark force that claimed its own. I turned to the engine once more, desperation igniting my actions. I yanked at the starter until it roared back to life. The moment felt holy, a miracle against the backdrop of horror. But the mass continued its assault, slapping at the hull and sending me reeling. I gripped the throttle, pushing it down hard, the boat lurching forward into the night, leaving behind the nightmare that clawed at my heels. As I sped away, the hum faded, replaced by the roar of the engine and my ragged breaths. I never looked back, afraid of what I might see lurking in the darkness. But as I approached the shore, I could feel its eyes on me still, the deep calling to the depths of my soul. I had escaped, but I knew I would never truly be free. The ocean held its secrets tightly, and I was now part of its haunting story. Story 6, Elevator to Nowhere, A Descent into Fear. The rain fell in torrents as I staggered through the lobby of the old Merrick Hotel, water dripping from my coat in thick streams. The air inside was thick with a musty scent, a mixture of damp carpets and neglected corners. I had arrived with the intention of spending a quiet weekend to escape the chaos of my life, but something about the place felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. It was as if the hotel breathed with a life of its own, the walls whispering secrets that I was not meant to hear. I looked around, taking in the faded grandeur of the lobby. An ornate chandelier hung low, its crystals dull from years of neglect, casting a pale light on the worn mahogany furniture. An elderly man sat slumped at the front desk, his gaze glassy and unfocused. He didn't move when I approached, so I rang the bell, the sound echoing hollowly in the cavernous space. "Check in?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "Room 12, he croaked, finally lifting his head. He slid an old brass key across the counter, the metal coal in my palm. "Elevator at the end of the hall." I nodded, suppressing a shiver that danced down my spine as I turned away. The elevator doors loomed at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor, their metal surface tarnished, reflecting a distorted image of my apprehensive face. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, but I brushed it off as anxiety from the long drive. The elevator was small and cramped, barely able to hold two people comfortably. I had never been fond of small spaces, and as the doors slid shut with a resounding clang, I could feel a trickle of sweat form at the base of my neck. I pressed the button for the second floor and the elevator jolted violently before smoothly beginning its ascent. But then came the first sign that something was amiss. The lights flickered overhead as a low groan escaped the machinery, making me clutch the railing. I remembered reading about the hotel's age and its intermittent electrical issues, but this felt different. The elevator halted abruptly between floors, the lights dimming to a sickly yellow. A voice whispered in my ear, a fleeting sensation, an echo devoid of words. My breath hitched, and I pressed the button repeatedly, desperate to escape the confined space. "Come on," I muttered under my breath. The elevator remained stubbornly still, and I could feel the weight of the air pressing in on me. I took a deep breath, grabbing hold of the emergency phone, wondering if I should pull the cord or just wait for the power to return. Then, the lights flickered back to life, and the elevator resumed its ascent with a lurch. I exhaled in relief as the doors opened with an eager creak. The second floor was dimly lit, a ghost of its former glory, with faded carpet and peeling wallpaper. I stepped out cautiously, glancing back at the elevator, half expecting it to snatch me back in. Room 12 was just a few doors down. The key slid easily into the lock, and the door opened with a muted groan. Inside, the room was musty but spacious, a large window overlooking the rain-soaked street below. I tossed my bag on the bed, the springs creaking in protest. As I surveyed my surroundings, I noticed an old armchair tucked into a corner, its upholstery faded and stained. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a curtain swaying gently as if stirred by a breeze, though the windows were firmly shut. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light, and began unpacking. Minutes turned into hours as the rain beat relentlessly against the window, forming chaotic patterns on the glass. I turned on the television for distraction, but the channels were filled with static, the only sound the occasional crackle. The room felt oddly oppressive, closing in around me. I decided to take a shower, hoping the steam would wash away my unease. As the water cascaded over me, I tried to relax, but the sensation of being watched prickled at the back of my mind. I brushed it off, convinced it was just the remnants of the elevator ordeal. When I finished, I wrapped a towel around my body and stepped into the chilly air of the room. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of soft laughter drifting through the walls. I froze, my heart racing. The laughter was childlike, echoing from somewhere beyond the room. I tiptoed to the wall, pressing my ear against the peeling paint. It grew louder, a chorus of giggles intermingled with an unsettling whisper that sent chills down my spine. I backed away, panic rising, and stumbled backward, almost tripping over my bag. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. Drawing a steadying breath, I told myself it was just the wind or perhaps the sound of guests in other rooms. I tried to convince myself that I was being ridiculous, but the laughter continued, interspersed with a faint tapping noise. It was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I felt a sudden urge to leave the room, to escape the strange sounds that were invading my sanctuary. I grabbed my coat and stepped back into the hallway. The atmosphere felt charged, almost alive, as if the hotel itself was aware of my presence. The moment I stepped out, I noticed the elevator doors were slightly ajar, an ominous invitation. An inexplicable force drew me toward it, a mixture of curiosity and dread clawing at my insides. I hesitated, remembering the strange sensation I had experienced earlier. But the laughter continued from somewhere deeper in the hotel, an echo that resonated through the empty halls. something compelled me to take a step forward. Breathing heavily, I approached the elevator, each step heavier than the last, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out the laughter that faded into an unsettling silence. The air in the hotel lobby felt oppressively thick, as though the walls were closing in around me. I clutched the worn strap of my bag, feeling the leather's familiar grit against my palm. The grand chandelier above flickered, a low hum engulfing the space, drowning out the muted conversations that swirled like a thick fog around me. I had hoped the presence of people would ease the growing unease that had settled over me since I had checked in, but it only intensified my discomfort. After the unsettling encounter at the front desk, I told myself it was nothing. The clerk had stared at me like I was a ghost, her wide eyes unblinking as she slid the room key across the counter. "Room 404, she had muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might summon something sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel had a history, a weighty past concealed beneath its polished facade. It wasn't just the flickering lights or the strange creaks that seemed to echo through the hallways. It was the murmur of something lurking just out of sight, something that had claimed this place long before I arrived. I made my way to the elevator, its doors sleek and metallic, reflecting my anxious expression back at me. I inhaled deeply, steeling myself, and pressed the button for the 4th floor. The elevator glided to life with a soft whir, the gentle ascent momentarily distracting me from the foul taste of anxiety that clung to my throat. As we rose, I felt the weight of the building pressing down, each floor flickering past in a blur. I could hear the hum of the machinery, rhythmic and almost soothing, but something was off. The air inside the cramped space felt charged, as if something were waiting to break the silence. I glanced at the small panel displaying the floor numbers, watching with bated breath as they climbed. 3, then 2, and finally 1. But just as the elevator should have reached the 4th floor, it shuddered violently. I stumbled, grabbing the metal railing to steady myself. The lights flickered and dimmed. Panic surged through me, and I pressed the button for my floor repeatedly, my heart racing. It was as though the entire hotel had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. With a jolt, the elevator came to a halt. The dim lights flickered back to life, illuminating the cramped space in a sickly yellow glow. The elevator doors remained stubbornly shut. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened, just a stubborn silence that echoed around me. A chill swept through the air, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. I was alone, suspended in a metal coffin between floors. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I thought of the sturdy walls surrounding me, the unyielding metal that separated me from whatever lay beyond. But all I could hear was the faint thudding of my heart and the oppressive silence that enveloped the space like a heavy fog. After what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered again, this time plunging me into darkness. I closed my eyes, waiting for the panic to settle. It was just a power outage, I reasoned. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't the end of my suffering. The silence stretched on, suffocating and thick. I could feel my thoughts spiraling, each one dragging me deeper into dread. I remembered the clerk's expression, those wide, haunted eyes, and the whisper of stories I had overheard in the lobby about strange occurrences in the hotel. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of whispered conversations, guests who had gone missing, strange noises in the night, and an elevator that had claimed more than one soul over the years. With a sudden lurch, the lights flickered back on. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent glow that flooded the elevator. The panic surged anew as I realized the doors had not opened. Instead, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a presence that felt almost tangible, pulling in the corners like a shadow. I pressed the buttons again, desperate now. The unyielding metal remained cold and unresponsive. Then came a soft whisper, barely audible over the mechanical whir. I strained to listen, but it was gone as quickly as it had arrived. My heart raced as I glanced around, searching for the source of the sound. Was I losing my mind? In that moment, the elevator jolted downward, more violently than before. I braced myself against the wall, the metal biting into my back as I felt the ground drop away. Panic consumed me. I thought I would be swallowed whole by this infernal machine. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. And then, just as abruptly as it had started, the elevator came to a halt. My heart thudded in my chest as I opened my eyes, the doors still firmly shut. The air hung heavy with a thick tension, and I could feel the weight of something lingering just beyond the metal barrier. Taking a shaky breath, I steadied myself. I had to escape. I couldn't linger here, trapped between floors, in a place that felt increasingly like a tomb. I needed to get out. I reached for the emergency button again, my finger trembling as I pressed it with urgency. The elevator jerked, the doors creaking open slowly, revealing a dark corridor beyond. My heart raced as I peered out into the dimly lit hallway stretching before me, a place that seemed both inviting and forbidding. I stepped forward, adrenaline propelling me, and the weight of the building felt less suffocating outside of the elevator. As I stepped into the corridor, the faint rustle of fabric caught my attention behind me. I turned, half expecting to see the clerk's wide-eyed face, but the elevator stood empty, waiting. I turned back to the hallway ahead, uncertainty gripping me, and took a deep breath, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The elevator doors slid open with an unsettling creak as I returned to the lobby after my brief stay in the claustrophobic confines of my room. A faint chill swept across the dimly lit space, as though the hotel itself had exhaled a long-held breath. I stepped into the lobby, hoping the warmth of human presence would dispel the disquiet I had felt during the last 24 hours. The front desk was manned by a weary-looking clerk who barely acknowledged me as I passed. He had been there since I checked in, his face a mask of boredom and indifference, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. His eyes darted toward the elevator every few moments, a slight twitch betraying his unease. I found it unnerving, as if he were waiting for something or someone to emerge from its confines. I cast a glance at the elevator doors, which now stood closed, a dark rectangle looming in the otherwise bright lobby. My mind drifted back to the warnings I had heard from the locals, murmurs of strange occurrences surrounding this place, the kind of tales that chased shadows and clung to the back of one's mind. Muffled sounds, heavy footsteps that echoed in the hallways, the sensation of being watched even in the solitude of my own room. I shook my head, trying to dismiss these thoughts as mere figments of my imagination. But as I waited for the elevator, I felt an undeniable pull toward it, a magnetic insistence that was impossible to ignore. My heart raced as I pressed the button, its dull chime echoing in the lobby like a low tolling bell. I should have walked out of the hotel and sought refuge elsewhere, but curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to plunge deeper into whatever lingered in the depths of this place. The elevator finally pinged, and the doors slid open smoothly, revealing a dim interior. I hesitated, glancing once more at the clerk. He had turned his gaze away, focusing instead on a stack of brochures, his fingers tapping nervously against the counter. I couldn't help but draw a breath as I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I felt the air shift, growing heavier. I pressed the button for the third floor, my heart thudding against my ribs with every tick of the elevator's ascent. It jolted slightly, and the lights flickered briefly, causing a surge of adrenaline to course through my veins. I chuckled nervously, attempting to convince myself that this was just a dusty, old machine in need of repair. The light stabilized, casting faint shadows that danced along the walls. I took a deep breath, willing myself to relax, but the elevator lurched to a sudden halt. My stomach dropped, panic clawing at my throat. There was no warning, no indication that the machine would fail. One moment I was gliding upward, and the next I was suspended in darkness. Great, I muttered to myself, hammering the button repeatedly. My breath quickened as silence enveloped me, an oppressive cloak that stifled any rational thought. I pressed the emergency button, but it emitted only a weak beep, not the frantic siren I had hoped for. The quiet was deafening, and as I leaned against the walls, I realized the soft hum of the machinery had vanished. I was alone, and yet I felt the presence of something watching me, lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. I strained to hear anything, footsteps, voices, anything that might assure me I had not been completely isolated. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The air grew thick with claustrophobia, and I was trapped in a coffin of steel and shadows. I could no longer ignore the insistent whispers that echoed within my mind, urging me to recall the stories I had heard. Strange tales of people who had disappeared in this very elevator, never to be seen again, their fates woven into the fabric of this cursed hotel. With trembling fingers, I fished my phone from my pocket, but the screen remained black, unresponsive. I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen it charged. Panic surged through me anew, and I banged on the doors, calling for help, the hollow sound reverberating back to me. "Hello?" My voice cracked, desperation infusing the single word. "Is anyone there?" Nothing answered. The air felt electric, charged with an impending dread, and I closed my eyes, trying to summon some calm. I envisioned the lobby, the clerk, the safety of the warm light spilling through the doors. I pictured my next steps, how I would step out of the elevator, how I would breathe again. But when I opened my eyes, the lights flickered once more, and I heard it, a soft, dragging sound, like fabric against metal, creeping from a corner I couldn't see. I turned my body, heart racing, breath hitching in my throat. The sound grew louder, a slow, deliberate movement that sent chills prickling along my spine. The doors began to rattle, and I could scarcely breathe as the lights flickered faster. Shadows twisted and morphed, and then I saw it, a figure, barely visible through the fog of my fear. It was a woman, her face obscured by long hair, her arm extending toward the elevator doors. She wore a tattered dress that billowed like smoke around her ankles as she moved closer, her fingertips brushing the cold steel. I was rooted to the spot, my mind screaming at me to run, to escape, but the elevator had become a prison of my own making. As the lights faltered one last time, plunging me into darkness, I felt the cold touch of her fingers against my own, and I knew I would never escape. The elevator dropped, and with it, my screams. The morning sun trickled through the window, illuminating the room in a dull, golden light. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart still racing from the events of the previous night. The hotel felt different now, as if it had shifted overnight, the walls whispering secrets that danced just out of reach. I had barely slept, too consumed by memories of the elevator. The dissonant chimes echoed in my mind, drowning out the remnants of my dreams. After a quick breakfast that I hardly tasted, I decided to explore the hotel further. Perhaps I could find a clue, something that would explain the inexplicable sense of dread clinging to me like a second skin. I stepped into the hallway, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps, and took a deliberate breath, steeling myself against the unease opening its jaws inside me. As I meandered through the corridors, I felt like an intruder in a world that was not my own. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of past guests, their expressions a mix of joy and melancholy. I wondered how many of them had truly experienced the hotel's charm and how many had vanished behind those closed doors, never to return. I shivered at the thought and quickened my pace, retracing my steps toward the elevator. The door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I hesitated, recalling the strange occurrences I had witnessed the night before, the flickering lights, the inexplicable presence that had brushed against me. But curiosity was a flame too potent to extinguish. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut with an unsettling hiss, and the elevator lurched into motion. As I descended, the car shuddered, and the lights flickered dangerously. I gripped the railing, my breath quickening. The numbers above the door blinked erratically, but instead of stopping at the ground floor, the elevator plunged further down, passing the familiar floors like lost souls drifting into darkness. Panic clawed at my throat. Had I pressed the wrong button? The car jostled to a halt, and a sudden silence enveloped me. The lights dimmed, and I felt a chill seep through the metal walls. I pounded the button for the ground floor again, but nothing happened. The air grew dense, and I could hear the faintest sound of a whisper just at the edge of my hearing. Was it my imagination? "Hello?" I called, though my voice trembled. The only response was the echo of my words, swallowed by the suffocating stillness. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing. I slammed my palm against the panel, anger and fear battling for dominance. "Let me out." There was a sudden jolt, and the elevator lurched violently. I stumbled, my heart racing as the lights flickered once more, casting long, distorted shadows over the walls. And then I heard it, a soft, almost melodic voice, clear as day. "Help me." I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. I turned slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. The voice felt closer, almost intimate, and it echoed with a longing that sent tremors of dread through every fiber of my being. I was alone. The car was empty. My mind raced through possibilities, but none made sense. Who was asking for help? "Who are you?" I croaked, barely able to form words. The response came as a whisper, curling around me like smoke. "You have to let me out." I choked back a sob, an instinctual urge to flee rising in my chest. I rattled the door, but it remained immovable, resigning me to the terror that lurked beyond. The whispers swirled through the air, each syllable heavy with despair. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door, hoping to discern its source. "Please," it begged. "I can't breathe." I staggered back, colliding with the railing, my breath coming in frantic gasps. I knew I had to calm down, to think logically. I'd read stories about haunted places, seen movies where people were trapped in elevators. But this felt different, genuinely terrifying. These were not just fictional tales. Something was undeniably wrong here. The elevator lurched again, and the lights sputtered, plunging me into darkness. I felt my way back to the control panel, frantically pressing every button until my fingers hurt. "Let me out. Please." I screamed, desperation rising with each passing second. Then, in the darkness, the whisper returned, more insistent, more powerful. "You have to help me. You're the only one who can." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the cacophony of noise swirling in my head. "I don't know how. I can't do this." But even as I said it, a part of me yearned to understand, to reach out and grasp the unseen. The elevator shuddered violently again, and this time I felt the ground shift beneath me. My heart raced as the car tilted, and I struggled to maintain my balance. With a final, jarring crash, the lights exploded back on, revealing a darkened version of the elevator's interior. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I wasn't completely alone. In the corner stood a figure, shadowy and indistinct, but human enough to send a wave of terror crashing over me. It turned toward me, the faint outline of a face twisted in anguish. "You must open the door," it rasped, its voice like grinding stone. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to escape. I had to get out of this nightmare. But the figure reached out, and I could feel the coldness radiating from it. "Please," it implored, desperation mingling with pain. "I can't go on like this." The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a voice. I was confronted by a real entity, trapped and searching for release. I felt the walls closing in, the air thickening as I stumbled toward the control panel one last time. With trembling fingers, I pressed the emergency button again. This time, the response was immediate. The doors rattled and then swung open, revealing the dimly lit corridor outside. Without a second thought, I rushed out, the weight of the encounter pressing heavily upon me. I turned to look back, but the elevator stood silent and still, leaving me alone in the hallway, the cries fading into the ether. I was free, but the horror of what I had witnessed clawed at the edges of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dark figure, the whispering voice, was still trapped within those metallic walls, waiting for anyone to heed its call and set it free. The following day, I woke up with a heavy heart, the memory of my father's funeral still fresh, like a bruise beneath my skin. The hotel felt larger than before, each corridor stretching endlessly, and the air thick with an unsettling silence. I had planned to leave this place behind, but an inexplicable tug kept me lingering, as if the hotel itself had a hold on me, whispering secrets behind every closed door. With a deep breath, I resolved to explore the building further, to find some distraction from the weight of grief that clung to me. I stepped out of my room with a half-hearted smile, hoping to shake off the gloom. The elevator doors loomed at the end of the hallway, their metallic sheen reflecting the dim lights above. I hesitated as I approached, recalling the strange occurrences from the day before. The flickering lights and the unnerving sensation of being watched flooded back to me. Still, curiosity and a hint of defiance propelled me forward. The elevator creaked and groaned as I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors opened slowly, as if reluctant to reveal their secrets. I stepped inside, the air stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and something metallic that sent a shiver down my spine. I pressed the button and felt the familiar jerk as the elevator began its descent. As I descended, I could hear the faint hum of the mechanisms working beneath me. It was a sound I had often associated with comfort, the gentle lift of a familiar routine. But today, it felt ominous. The elevator jolted suddenly, and I braced myself against the wall, confusion flooding my mind as the lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. I peered through the small window in the doors, but all I could see was darkness, a void beyond the metal shell. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I steadied myself. I had to calm down. It was just a malfunction. I pressed the button to stop the descent, but instead, the elevator lurched upward, defying gravity in a way that sent a jolt of dread through me. Then came the sound, a faint, distant whisper permeating the stillness. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words, but they slipped away like fog. My heart raced as I pressed the buttons frantically, each one lighting up but not producing any response. The elevator shuddered, and a cold sweat broke out on my brow. It was as if something inside the machine had awakened, something that had been dormant for years, waiting for the right moment. I pulled my phone from my pocket, but no service. Just my own reflection staring back at me, eyes wide with fear. The whispers grew louder, suddenly clear, echoing in my mind like a dark lullaby. "Help us! Help us!" I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a cry, my mind racing through the stories I had heard about the hotel, the ghostly figures that roamed the halls, the tragic deaths that had occurred within its walls. I had brushed them aside as mere folklore, but now I felt an undeniable weight of their truth. The elevator lurched again, this time more violently, as if something was trying to heave itself through the walls. I braced myself against the railing, my breath coming out in panic gasps. The lights flickered one last time before plunging me into complete darkness. In the pitch black, the whispers transformed into cries, a cacophony that reverberated through the small space. I clawed at the walls, desperate for some semblance of control, but it only felt like a tomb closing in on me. Then, I remembered the emergency button. I fumbled for it, pressing it repeatedly, praying for a response. With a jolt, the elevator came to a sudden stop. The silence was deafening, the handful of whispers fading into nothingness. I held my breath, listening for any sign of life, my heart pounding in my ears. It was then that I noticed a faint glimmer of light seeping through the crack between the doors. My mind raced. Was it salvation or something more sinister? I approached the doors hesitantly, gripping the metal handle. With a swift motion, I pulled them open, the creaking sound echoing in the silence. The lobby came into view, but it was empty, devoid of life, as if I had stepped into a ghost town. I stumbled out, my heart still racing, and turned back to the elevator, half expecting it to lurch back to life, to swallow me whole. But it remained still, a silent sentinel watching over me. I took a step forward, gripping the reception desk for support as the weight of my ordeal settled over me. The lobby felt different now, the air thick with unease, the shadows stretching longer than they should. I glanced around for anyone, hotel staff, fellow guests, but the place was eerily quiet. A chill swept through me as I realized that I was utterly alone. That's when I heard it again, the whispers, this time closer, more urgent. I whipped around, searching for the source, but the lobby remained empty, the silence swallowing my fear. I had to leave. I had to. Just as I turned to flee, the elevator dinged behind me, a mocking sound that echoed through the vast space. I spun around, my heart in my throat as the doors slid open once again. I could almost see the shadows shifting within, beckoning me to return. I took a step backward, feeling the cold tile beneath my feet as I registered the invitation. The darkness was calling me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The air thickened with dread as I stood, torn between the promise of the unknown and the safety of the familiar. Whatever haunted this hotel was not done with me yet. As the whispers swelled in volume, I knew I had to confront whatever lay ahead, whether it was my father's ghost or something far more sinister. The elevator, with all its secrets, had only just begun its game,